broadcaster, William Muck.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Joan Esposito Show. My name is William Muck, and I'm filling in for Joan today, and I'll actually be here on Monday as well, a double dose, a sort of bookend of the weekend here. As many of you know, I'm a political science professor out at North Central College out in Naperville, Illinois, and let me just start by saying I'm so happy that Joan's getting away and getting some time off to California. I hope it's relaxing. I am most certain the weather is going to be better than what we're getting in Chicago today, which is pretty miserable. So it's good for her to get away, and I hope she gets some relaxing and rejuvenation and all of that. But I'm also really excited to be here, and for a couple of reasons. One, radio is just a lot of fun. Being here, interacting with all of you has been super engaging and dynamic, and I've sort of gotten hooked on radio the last 6 months or so, and I've had a chance to fill in. But more importantly, you may not have noticed, but these are dark times. We find ourselves in this very precarious democratic moment. And in those moments, when things appear to be going awry and are very stressful, it's important that we have a sense of community. And that's what I feel when I'm here, the sense of community that, we spend our time thinking and grappling and trying to understand the world around us. A world that at times can feel like it is crumbling, right? So that's why being here, being in this sense of community, talking through things is really, really important. Social media is great. You can build social media, you can build community on social media, but hearing each other, talking to each other, finding that presence, especially in moments where it can be hard, right? I was talking to colleagues the other day and noting that all of us are probably a little more grumpy in our day-to-day lives with the people around us just because of the political context that we find ourselves in. So what we're doing over today and Monday is building some sense of community, commiserating, but also trying to understand the moment we find ourselves in, and then how we respond to that moment. So while Joan's away, we're going to pick up the torch of watching over the democracy, talking about what's going on, what to make of it, and what we should do in response. So, all right, before we get to all of that, let's talk about what we've got on the show today, what's lined up. We'll begin. I've got a few thoughts that I'm going to share in this first half hour, and then we'll open the phone lines for a full hour at 2:30. Actually, we'll probably open the phone lines at 2:15 because it's Friday, and we need to set some time aside to think through all that's happened this week. Then at 3:30, we're going to be joined by Dr. Philip Barker, who many of you know is a professor of political science at Keene State College out of New Hampshire. He specializes in international politics. We're going to think through the developments in U.S. foreign policy that have played out over the last week or so, the developments with Ukraine and Russia. Obviously today, news on Iran. So there's just a lot going on. Also thinking through the tariffs and the chaos surrounding that and what all that means. So thinking through how to understand those international dynamics. So then at 4, and we are really, really excited about this, we're going to be joined by Representative Casten, who is the congressman representing the 6th District of Illinois. I would argue one of the leading voices pushing back against Trump and Trumpism, a just deeply, deeply thoughtful and engaging intellectual who happens to be in Congress. He's going to join us and talk a little bit about what he's seeing up close. So that's right at the top of the 4 o'clock hour. Make sure that you tune in for that. Then in the last hour, we're going to be joined by David Super, who's a constitutional law scholar at Georgetown Law School. Again, this is another conversation you're not going to want to miss. David is one of the leading voices thinking and writing about the legality of Trump's flurry of activities in these first 45 days. He's come to the conclusion that many of these actions that we are seeing are absolutely in direct violation of the law and the Constitution. And it'd be really useful to talk with him and kind of get a sense why these things are illegal. And it's easy to lose focus given the sheer number of things that are happening. So all in all, it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you as well. So let's begin. We are at day 45 of the second Trump administration, Trump 2.0. 45 is an interesting number. In some ways, it doesn't feel very long at all. In other ways, this feels like a lifetime. I was trying to think through, like 45, it's a little longer than a month, but, at a minimum, the time and maybe importantly, the pace which the Trump administration has gone about their work, it's just overwhelming, right? But that being said, the 45-day time period is giving us a sense to sort of appreciate what's going on. I think we're getting a pretty clear picture of what they are up to and their specific vision for governance. Something that's, maybe hard to do in a week or two, but by 45 days, we understand that. So the challenge of making sense of it all is that they are intentionally trying to overload us. And make no mistake, this is an actual strategy. Steve Bannon has referred to it as flooding the zone, doing so much so quickly that we can't possibly take the time to deliberate fully on each and every single issue. So day in, day out, we're talking about that day's development, but we don't have the time to put the big puzzle together. So that's what I thought I would do for the first little segment here, is offer some thoughts on what I'm seeing, take a step back and say, what is the bigger picture, this broad pattern of activities and actions that we've seen out of the Trump administration in these first 45 days? What should we make of it? What does it suggest about how they are governing? And I will say, this is where being a political scientist has a little bit of value. Most times in life, being a political scientist has very little value. But in this moment, we do, because we try to make sense of broad patterns in history. And what's really interesting, and if I'm honest, also very disturbing, is that a clear pattern has emerged. A pattern suggesting that we are in the midst of a not-so-subtle drift towards authoritarianism. We're seeing real democratic decline in our country, again, in just 45 days. And many of us who were so worried about a second Trump presidency, I don't think we really even imagined how quickly all of this could take place. And again, this is not just me talking. I spent a lot of time thinking and reading and talking to others, leading experts on democracy and authoritarianism, individuals in political science, history, economics, people who spent a lot of time grappling with these questions. They've spent their lives studying this, and they're all terrified. And I think that's what scares me more than maybe even my assessment. America's democracy is under attack by the individuals we elected to protect it. So, and what makes this conclusion so easy to come to is they're not hiding their actions. We can see this plain as day in what they're up to. Academics who study this stuff know the patterns. They can point to other examples of history, what we've seen in the first 45 days. We could think about examples like, drifts towards authoritarianism that we saw in Russia, Venezuela, Turkey, Hungary, or more hauntingly, historical examples like Hitler's dismantling of the German democracy in the 1930s. There's a playbook that authoritarians deploy, one in which they use the tools of democracy to undermine democracy. And then again, that's what we're seeing in these first 45 days. Let's think about some very specific examples that have sort of jumped out just more recently. One of the first things authoritarians do, as they're trying to dismantle a democracy, is target the judiciary and the press. Why target those two things, right? Think about they're going after the judges and go after the press. Why? Because they are the two institutions that can most quickly halt on authoritarians' actions. Venezuela is just such a prime example of this. When Hugo Chavez came into power, one of the first things he did was attack the Supreme Court and then ultimately fill it with his loyalists. Now, what have we seen out of the Trump administration? They've publicly criticized any judge who places an injunction on their efforts. Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon, all have come out and suggested that such actions by judges are in fact illegal. As a reminder of all this, on a podcast in 2021, J.D. Vance suggested that if reelected, Donald Trump should, and quote, I'm going to read this quote here, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state. Then when the courts stop you, you stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it, end quote. That's something J.D. Vance said. And that's something that we are, in fact, seeing today. We're seeing them attack those local judges. Think about it at Trump's congressional address this last Tuesday. There was this really remarkable moment where he's walking by and he's shaking this before the speech, talking to the Supreme Court justices there. And he shakes John Roberts' hand and he says, thank you again. Thank you again. Won't forget it. Now, we can't say with certainty what that was all about, but it sure gave off the impression of a mob boss dealing with a client. At minimum, it was completely inappropriate for the president to be saying that. Now, I have no idea how John Roberts reacted to it. If you've seen the video of Amy Coney Barrett as Trump walks by her, I think it's fair to say that she doesn't think much of Donald Trump, that the sort of a death stare that she gave to Donald Trump. But nevertheless, you see him trying to work the judiciary. Again, even if Roberts had no idea this was coming, the fact that Donald Trump is doing that and saying that is important. What about the press? Let's think about what the Trump administration has done on that ground. Trump has banned the Associated Press from the White House. He has stripped the White House Correspondents Association of its role managing the White House press pool. Instead, Donald Trump and the White House, decides which journalists will be part of the small rotating group who accompany the president, upending decades of practice. We saw an example of this last Friday when Brian Glenn, a correspondent for Real America's Voice, this is a right-wing cable channel, he was the one that asked Zelensky why he wasn't wearing a suit. In previous times, that news outlet and that individual wouldn't have had access to power. Very, very different today. All right, we will continue this. We got to take a quick little break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about what we're witnessing in real time and what we should make of all these developments. We'll be right back right after this.
Stephanie Miller.
Bob Cesca joins us now.
Oh, God, shut down the internet. Can we just shut it down? We just got to unplug it. We need a timeout from the internet.
Yeah.
All of American society. I think, you know what? I say that half jokingly, but the other half is like, yeah. As someone who worked his entire career on the internet, I feel like we just weren't evolved enough. We weren't ready when it came along. Came along way too soon.
Stephanie Miller, weekday mornings, 8 to 11 on WCPT 820.
Feeling overwhelmed, kind of like, hey, I can't remember how to relax. Well, you're not alone. Illness, accidents, sheer stress can cause everything from headaches to feeling constantly on edge. If this is you, give Michelle Beaubier at Resource Wellness in Wilmette a call. Michelle is a biodynamic craniosacral therapist. She also teaches Qigong, a form of moving meditation. She helps people with post-surgical problems, concussions, migraines, insomnia, the effects of trauma, and more. Michelle helps her clients balance their nervous systems and achieve deep rest that can lead to profound change. As a PTSD survivor herself, she gets it, and she loves helping people back into balance. As one client said, Michelle has been my reset button. So if you need a reset, call Michelle at 773-991-4357 or check her website, resourcewellnessllc.com. 773-991-4357, resourcewellnessllc.com.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We've been talking about what we've been witnessing in the first 45 days of the Trump administration. It has been a lot. I want to get back to that. Before we do so, let's open those phone lines and we can talk about anything on your mind today. Need inspiration to get sort of those creative juices flowing? Let's just think about some stuff. The war in Ukraine, Trump Zelensky, Trump embracing Putin. A question that I think is really important that isn't getting a lot of attention is Trump going to run for president for life? I think there's some really interesting conversations about that. His attack on the media, USAID. If anybody's interested in talking about what we're seeing out of Germany and the rise of this alternative for Deutschland or Germany, that's an interesting conversation. So there is a lot that we can kick around. And if you normally don't call into the show, or maybe you're a first-time caller, I encourage you to pick up that phone. I love to hear from you. So, again, let's call in or send those texts in. The number here, 773-763-9278. Feel free to call in or text the line. I've said this before when I filled in for Joan, but this hour when we chat with everybody is really a lot of fun for me. So, all right, before we went to break, I was talking a little bit about those first 45 days and what we're seeing and why it has so many people who study democracy troubled. Talked a little bit about the attack on the Justice Department, attack on the judges, also the free press. Let's spend a minute just talking about this DOGE, right? So what should we make of this effort by the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, to clean up government corruption? The effort at this government efficiency, I would argue, isn't about efficiency or cutting waste. This is a calculated effort to purge federal agencies of anyone who might challenge the actions of the president. It's straight, again, from the authoritarian playbook. And there's an ideological mission behind it. Trump sees these civil servants as sort of liberal defenders of the system. So again, this is a very, very common pattern when you see democratic decline. When you see a rise of authoritarianism, you have to attack the existing bureaucracy, those civil servants, because they are the ones who are actually there for democracy. They're there to do their job. And if you want to corrupt those practices, you have to get rid of them. So as all, you frame these political purges as administrative reform. And in doing so, you mask your true motivations, your true political motivations. Now, after purging these organizations, you inevitably replace them, the career civil servants with loyalists. I think that's something that we're seeing, especially at the top of these organizations, because you want to ensure that the bureaucracy executes your new agenda without any resistance. Think of the FBI, right? Where the president tapped two right-wing conspiracy theorists, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, to hold the top two positions at the FBI. I mean, again, this hasn't gotten a ton of attention, but it's mind-boggling. Let's not forget Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Like a couple of weeks ago, he had this late-night firing of the senior military lawyers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Again, something that didn't get a ton of attention. Lawyers who by law are required to provide independent legal advice to the Pentagon's civilian and military leaders. Why do that? Why target the military lawyers whose job it is to tell the president what is legal and illegal? Well, maybe you do that because you want to undermine those precedents. Speaking of the law, Trump has openly endorsed his view that he as president or king is above the law. We all remember a couple of weeks back when on Truth Social he declared, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." Repeating a variation of a quote attributed to Napoleon, right? We start to think about all of these pieces together. Or a few days later when he claimed to have killed congestion pricing in New York and announced congestion pricing is dead in Manhattan and all of New York. New York is saved. Long live the king. That's not normal, right? I mean, the president of the United States should not be referring to him as a Napoleon-like figure or referring to himself as a king, especially given the history in this country. We've also seen him targeting speech in higher education. The efforts to eliminate all references to DEI is really telling. For all of Elon's talk about him being a free speech absolutist, their effort to scrub the government of any reference to DEI feels very much like the firewall that the Chinese government has built to regulate speech. In my classes, we just spent a couple days studying China and thinking about that firewall. And they control what people can say. So if you're in China and you want to send a message about Tiananmen Square, it doesn't go through. And what we're seeing here is the Trump administration is scrubbing these ideas. These conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion are being removed. He also recently posted a message on social media directly targeting free speech, protests, and the universities. And this is, I'll read this to you in just a second, but this is one that hits awfully close to home as somebody who's at an institution of higher education. He said, all federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. And he closes with no masks, right, which also is just sort of weird, right? So there's a mix of weird and ugliness here. I was pretty upset about this, and I was pretty freaked out about this. And I think a lot of people in higher ed were upset about this. This is the Trump administration trying to intimidate and attack our colleges and universities. And this isn't getting the same sort of attention. But even today, there was a news story out that the Trump administration is cutting $400 million of grants to Columbia. Later, we're going to talk to David Super from Georgetown. Georgetown has been under attack by the Trump administration. Why do that? Well, these are the places that are going to push back. These are the places where we have different ideas and we grapple with democracy and authoritarianism, all of these things. Donald Trump sees these things as a threat. And it's necessary to eliminate those threats. So when we step back and take a moment to appreciate all that is happening, the pattern becomes pretty clear. It's anti-democratic. It's also nihilistic to its core. I heard somebody, I think it was David Brooks on PBS, was talking about sort of the nihilism of all this, that you don't believe in anything and it's just about destruction. And I think there's a lot to that. It's about destroying everything in the hope of increasing his own individual power. So this last week, Thomas Edsall, who is an opinion writer for the New York Times, he had this piece where he was also thinking about what we're seeing in these first 45 days or so, what's going on. And I'm going to read you the closing paragraph from his piece because it's a little bit dark, and I'm going to preview that. He's a little worried. But I think it's important that we understand the nature of the threat. So to wrap up this piece he wrote, assuming that the past 6 weeks are predictive of what's next. Expect an age of anxiety. Expect the elimination of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs. Expect the decimation of liberal institutions to go on for all 4 years of Trump's second term. Expect government services to deteriorate. Expect reduced funding at the safety net. Expect more homelessness, hunger, and disease. Expect poverty. Expect the financial starvation of universities and non-governmental organizations. And expect unannounced raids, unreliable data, and an America increasingly aligned with the authoritarians worldwide. Expect a perverse climate of suspicion and a preoccupation with revenge. Expect more suffering, more fear, less security, and less happiness. In other words, expect the worst. And I read that, and I had to sort of sit down and say, geez, this is really, really dark. But I think without the proper response, this is where the country is heading. And I don't think there's a ton of optimism right now, but I think we now know, 45 days in, we have a sense of what's going on. We appreciate the nature of the challenge. And in some ways, that's inspiring as we think about what we can do and how we can respond. And I think we have to hope that the institutions push back. So I think we have to hope that we see the courts do their job and demonstrate their role in a democracy. I think we have to hope that the media steps in and does its job and continues to push. And again, that's why formats like this are so, so important, to have these hard conversations, to grapple with real issues, and to find ways to push back. But I also think it's up to us as well, as a democracy, to push back, right? To think about the town halls. One of the things that have been most encouraging for me in these first 45 days is all of these town halls, even in conservative districts, where people are showing up and they're asking hard questions and they're pushing back and saying, this isn't okay. Because it's not okay. And I think we finally know enough. Maybe a week or two in, we could say, it's not clear where the president is heading. Maybe even, 3 or 4 weeks. But now 45 days in, it's clear what the president is up to. And it is an effort to use the tools of democracy to undermine this democracy. And as we think about the nature of that threat, I can't think of another threat going back to maybe the Civil War. That's the last time we've seen this type of stress on the democracy. And it can be overwhelming. And I think for many of us, after Donald Trump was elected and that time period between the election and actually inauguration, many of us pulled away and said, we just can't do anything anymore. We're just overwhelmed. But now I think is the time where we start to engage again. It's the time to start thinking and talking and pushing back and using the platforms that we have to raise these issues more broadly. I think that's really, really important. So after 45 days, I'm worried. I think we should all be worried, but I think we should use that to empower ourselves. All right, we've got to get to another break right here. When we come back, we are going to open the phone lines, and I see a whole bunch of callers already waiting for us. So that number is 773-763-9278. Let's get those phone lines moving, the text lines open, and let's grapple with democracy. We'll be right back.
This is a WCPT Veteran Minute. In the heart of World War II, while the skies rumbled with the roar of combat, a groundbreaking squad of pilots emerged from the segregated South, the Tuskegee Airmen. An elite group of African-American pilots defied the odds with their courage and skills. Trained at the Tuskegee Army Airfields in Alabama, they became the first black aviators in the U.S. military. Despite facing racism and skepticism, they soared through the skies with unmatched precision, escorting bombers and earning a distinguished reputation for their bravery. Their red-tailed P-51 Mustangs became a symbol of excellence and resilience, and in 2007, the Tuskegee Airmen were finally honored as they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. These aviators didn't just fight for victory in the air, they battled for equality on the ground, forever altering the landscape of the American military and inspiring generations to come. This has been a WCPT Veteran Minute.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. We'll see periods of rain and snow mixing at times here for this afternoon with cloudy skies and temperatures holding rather steady. Winds out of the northeast around 5 to 10 miles per hour. Tonight, a slight chance for rain and snow mixing early, then decreasing cloud cover, a low near 27. Saturday, sunshine, high 44 degrees. Sunday, plenty of blue skies and sun with a high of 53. Monday, sunny, high of 61. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Currently, it's 36.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Because that's how we roll.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. I'm so excited. We've got the phone lines and the text lines open, so let's get those calls moving. Again, that number is 773-763-9278. Before we do so, I want to remind everybody that tonight from 5 to 7, Patty Vasquez will be joined by comedians Paul Farvar and Paul Ollinger, Reed McCollum, chair of the Democratic Party of DuPage County, and Anita Pindur and James Harris, who will be talking about the Are You Really Winning Illinois helpline, the 1-800-GAMBLER. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez, weekdays from 5 to 7 p.m. Central on WCPT 820, the Heartland Signal website, tune in, YouTube, and Facebook. All right, well, let's get to the calls. Jim from Chicago. Hey, Jim, how are you doing?
Hi, Professor Muck. This chapter in American history demands an opera. It demands an opera. And the principles are obvious. I mean, the principles in the opera are obvious. But I'd given at least an act and a half to the cabinet. And in the cabinet, while they're taking on democracy, they'd have a picture of FDR on the wall with a mustache painted on him. And then you can imagine the music. It would just be a delight. But this chapter in American history demands an opera.
It is. This is really interesting, Jim. You're right, because it you know what? It's opera-like or very Shakespearean, right? Although I think it's more like sort of Shakespeare for dummies, because there's the political theater and all of that, and the backstabbing and all those dynamics. But absolutely. So is that a good thing or a bad thing, Jim?
No, it's a good thing because remember that an opera can only get two ways, or a play, tragic or comedy. So this has both. In spades in it, but I think it'd be just a smash hit because the absurdities of our times they have to be recorded and pointed out to future generations.
This is true. I do wonder, because when we're in the moment, it's sometimes hard to appreciate it, although I think we're doing a pretty good job of appreciating the moment. But, like, how will people 25, 50, 100, down the road, will they look back at this moment? And I think this moment will stand out. And, I think about, like, young people. What will they think about? Like, what were we doing? Why did we think this was okay? What was the American public thinking that electing somebody, a populist demagogue like Donald Trump was a good thing? And, yeah, but you're right. As dangerous as Donald Trump is, there is an element, there's a sort of theatrical element that we can't take our eyes off of him, right? And the media gets that. So the media is, Donald Trump is very, very good for the media because he brings in clicks and links and people want to watch him. But it's sort of a danger, right? But I love your point about how this is going to end, right? We know how operas and we know how Shakespeare ends. So hopefully we will come to our senses.
Anyway, but Trump himself, I mean, I could never even look at his face. Even when he had The Apprentice or when Barbara Walters dug him out of the Japanese army, I could never look at his face. I could never understand what intellectual properties he possessed. But the cabinet is the interesting thing. How they can have a meeting and say, how are we going to destroy democracy? How are we going to take 240 years of American history and try to, when we die, try to keep this thing going? That's the interesting thing to me. Why the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 think that when they finally leave this earth, that it's going to still exist?
Yeah.
That's the really the weird That's the nut of this thing. Anyway, Professor, thanks a million for taking my call. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks so much for calling in, Jim. I think you're always so thoughtful on this matter, and you're this is true, right? And so there's the study of Donald Trump, and how does he happen? But then maybe, equally interesting is that question about those around him. Maybe later today, or maybe when I'm back on Monday, I want to talk a little bit about Marco Rubio. But this idea that those around him, what's going through their minds? Do they understand this? Are they just so excited to be close to power? Is the allure of power so powerful that you're willing to compromise your morals, your ethics, what you know to be right and wrong? Because we see this over and over again, where members of Trump's cabinet have said one thing before they were brought in, and now they say something very different. Jim, I'm going to be thinking about the Trump administration as a Shakespearean type opera for a while now. That's really, really interesting. So thanks for calling in. All right, let's jump over we have Dave from Hoffman Estates. He wants to talk about tariffs. Hey, Dave, welcome to the Joan Esposito Show.
Hey, Professor. Yeah, I got to thinking the way he's been bouncing around like a basketball with these on this tariffs. On one day he's going to do it, then he sees the stock market crash, and then he says, "I don't pay attention to the stock market." Yeah, right. And then he does a reprieve and pauses it for a month or so, on the goods and on the autos and stuff like that. He's kind of reminding me like of a lovesick teenage boy plucking petals from a daisy, saying she loves me not, or he's getting his decision and that. And two other points real quick.
Yeah.
And then they're planning to cut the VA staff by 80,000. That's real smart when it's already been kind of understaffed. And veterans had complained about the current speed and that, and they want to reduce it down to 2019 or lower staffing. That's just incompetence on these guys wanting to do this, and they're hurting real people here. So.
Absolutely, right? Two things you've highlighted thus far, and I'll let you get back just a second, but I wanted to intervene and say here, you're talking about bad economics and bad politics, right? You can't find a mainstream economist who thinks that tariffs are good for the U.S. economy, right? Or at least these sort of blanket tariffs that he's doing. But even if you believed in tariffs, the way in which he's going about it, one day it's tariffs, the next day, okay, we're going to let the auto industry be immune, and the next day we're going to pull it back. And so this back and forth, markets hate it. I mean, it's just bad economics. It's bad business. And then to your next point about the VA staff, that's just bad politics, right? I mean, this is something that we as a country have said the veterans should be supported. And year in and year out, we hear the struggles of the VA in terms of needing more resources, needing more funding, more good people. And so if you're going to target that, that's a demographic that Republicans, but the whole country as a whole says, no, we should not be neglecting them. So I think your point, I love your Daisy example too. It's bad economics and it's bad politics.
The plus at the VA, about 30%, maybe more, are veterans that work there. That they just fired, and then you're talking about him like a king or whatever. I just seen a story today where he's declaring the TSA screener union contract void.
Yeah,
is he doing a Reagan's Patco deal there? I think.
Yeah, there's these, he just does these power grabs. Like, previous presidents, all presidents challenge their authority, right? I think that's just the nature of the president, is you try to see where you can go. But for Donald Trump, it's so consistent, it's so regular. He's basically saying, I'm going to do this, and then let's let the court stop me. And it really is so disruptive.
Hey, Professor, and lastly, so you can get to others, I've been waiting to. And in the past, I've been in an anachronism where I used to always mail in my taxes, but I believe I might have to do it electronically this year because of the fact of him wanting to fire 45,000 IRS agents.
Yeah.
I mean, it might take a year before I get my money if I do it by mail. I mean,
no, I think it's time to, Dave, it's time to jump into the 21st century. Go electronic. No, I think that's absolutely right.
Thanks, Professor. Thank you for taking the call and biting with me on it. So Have a good week and be well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. No, I think that point about the IRS fire, I mean, there's so many firings. There's been so much cutting that it's hard to, you sometimes lose focus about what's happened. But, we should go back and think a little bit about this. I mean, the reason that the IRS built up the staff there was that they realized that there was extensive cheating going on at those sort of elite levels, right? And that if you had more IRS agents, you could go after and bring much more money, the legitimate money into the government. That there are very rich individuals who are able to manipulate the tax system, and that if you had more agents, you could confront that. So when you think about Donald Trump's talk about wanting to balance the budget and address these concerns, like this is an easy legal way to do that and say, hey, there are people who should be paying more into the system that we all benefit from, and we should find those individuals. But the fact that you're eliminating IRS agents when you know that's the case suggests that the DOJ effort is motivated by very different things. So thanks, Dave. That was really some interesting points. So let's jump to Ed in Palos Heights. Hey, Ed, how are you?
Yeah, hi, Professor. Thank you for taking my call. I have a few comments.
Yeah.
Number one would be the 10 Democrats that voted with the Republicans to censure Al Green after he courageously stood up and shouted out against Trump the lies, and then he was removed from the chambers there. And we don't need people to do that in our party. It just shows weakness and a lack of courage. We need the opposite. And right now, I so wish that a strong leader would emerge so he could lead the charge to retaliate against all this nonsense that Trump is doing.
This is Ed.
Go ahead.
I would just say those are two really, really interesting points, right? And the first thing it made me think of is think back when Joe Biden was president and giving his State of the Union speeches, and the number of times Marjorie Taylor Greene or others intervened and jumped in, and again, we always say that it's not appropriate to do so, but none of those individuals were ever censured. Going all the way back, to Obama and the Republican who yelled "You lie," right? I mean, we condemn those sort of rhetorically, but not with censure, and I think it speaks to your second point is, leadership of the Democratic Party. One of the advantages the Republicans have had for a long period of time is that Trump has been that guy, right? I mean, you're going all the way back to 2016. He has been the face of the Republican Party. Even when he was voted out of power, he still was the one figure who could articulate the Republican position. And right now, the Democrats, just because of the nature of the election, don't have that voice. Joe Biden is no longer that figure. Kamala Harris isn't either. And so you see others. You see J.B. Pritzker, who's sort of assuming some of that mantle, but it's much more disorganized. And you're right; it's hard to set a uniform message for an entire party when you don't have that one individual who can express that for the group as a whole.
Exactly. And one more comment. He was at a conference this morning there talking about the tariffs. And he just pinballed his way through the entire segment there. Nothing he said made any sense whatsoever. I mean, it's like he was just trying to make excuses. He didn't know what he was talking about. And how could you depend on somebody like that to lead the country? And I go back, some people that are in favor of him, that book that came out a few years back, Art of the Deal, he did not write it. It was written by a ghostwriter. And instead of calling it Art of the Deal, they should have called it Art of the Bankruptcies, 6 bankruptcies. And, and he wants to bankrupt our beloved United States.
Yeah.
And why people can't see through him is complete bewilderment for me.
Well,
go ahead.
No, and you're right, because the thing is, it's not about his knowledge of tariffs at all. You're right, because he doesn't have that type of knowledge. It's sort of the identity politics he has. But you're absolutely right. That's such an important point.
Yes. So I'm just hoping that that leader surfaces, and we could go forward with a charge to start evening things out, because just what he's tearing apart, I mean, it's horrendous, you know?
Yes.
The VA, I mean, 70,000 people are going to be let go. And, I mean, these are our veterans that, you know, help us and safeguard us. And that shows a lack of respect, you know, well, he has no respect for no one. I mean, it's evident in his behavior. So, but I just wanted to get those points across, Professor, and thanks for taking the call.
Well, thanks so much for calling in, Ed. Ed, I think you hit it on the nail on the head, right? And especially into this idea that I think oftentimes we give Donald Trump too much credit for knowing things, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, you know, what is his philosophy? How does, you know, what's his worldview? How is he doing things? And the reality is, I think there's a sort of a narcissism. It's, you know, all about him. There's a nihilism of wanting to destroy and not believe in anything. And I think that's what we see when you get him to talk about tariffs, because, you know, there can be a real conversation about strategic tariffs. You know, there are moments, you know, there are economists who would argue there are moments when you want to protect a real, you know, a particular industry. And so a strategic use of a tariff against one particular country could be in the country's interest. But that's not the conversation Donald Trump wants to have. He just talks about them. I think he likes the power. He likes the power that, you know, the tariff is one power that basically Congress has ceded to the president. And he likes that he can do it and pull it away and do all of this and create chaos separate from any sort of economic impact and relevance. So, no, I think you're right that it's really, really dangerous. And the Democrats could benefit from having somebody who could be that one voice we all turn to. Now, the reality is that's probably not going to happen because we're too far away from a presidential election at this moment. But I think there are going to be voices, again, like I said, with J.B. Pritzker and others who will step up and start to say, hey, this is where the Democrats should be. And I think that would be good for everybody. All right, we got to get to a break. But when we come back, we're going to take some more calls. Again, 773-763-9278. And we'll get to some of the text line as well. We'll be right back.
If you turned 65 recently like me, it's important you find a Medicare Advantage plan that gives you the coverage you're looking for. But finding one can be difficult. The best thing I did, and I suggest you do the same, is call a licensed insurance agent and let them walk you through your Medicare Advantage plan options. There are so many benefits you have access to, so make the call now and let the representatives explain everything to you. Our licensed insurance agents can offer you a variety of Medicare Advantage plans. Plus, the call is free, the information is free, and there's no obligation to enroll. We're here to make it easy for you to select a Medicare Advantage plan that may work for your needs. Finding a Medicare Advantage plan can be easy if you do what I did. Make a quick call right now to learn more. Thank you.
800-365-6303. 800-365-6303. 800-365-6303. That's 800-365-6303.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We have the phone lines open, and we're talking about all sorts of things, and not surprising, a lot of it focusing on Donald Trump. We'll get back to the calls and the texts in just a second, but also want to remind everybody that tomorrow on The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, his guests are Michael Tomasky, editor of The New Republic, Bill Scher, politics editor at The Washington Monthly, Hader Harris, PEN America's Washington managing director, and Ezra Levine, co-founder and co-executive of The Indivisible. The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays from 1 to 4 p.m. Central on WCPT. I'm always impressed with the guests that Edwin gets on there. Some really, really thoughtful people. Let's go to the text line where we have Mike M., who he texts in. He says, Professor Muck, I was so disappointed and disgusted that Democrats sat on their hands and showed no backbone at all when they threw Representative Al Green out of Trump's propaganda fest. Representative Green stood up and called out Trump's BS, and Dems showed no backbone. I'm disgusted with them. What are your thoughts regarding this? And I think, Mike, this is a really, really interesting point, and it shows the difficult position that Democrats are in. it is difficult to confront Donald Trump, and you have to think about that strategy. And I think Al Green's approach was an interesting one, right? He wants to raise attention and he wants to cause trouble, and I think his individual actions were really valuable as we think about Medicaid and Medicare, and so the arguments that he was making. But the Democrats as a whole also are thinking about how is Trump going to respond to them. And I think right now what we're seeing is sort of a wait and see. And I think to your point and to a lot of other Democrats, they would like to see more. They would like to see more confrontation. I heard somebody describe it the other day that, it was talking to some academics, and that it felt like the Trump and the Republicans were sort of the bullies in the room, and that the Democrats kind of came off as the nerds, right? They were there with their signs and they were protesting, but they weren't really pushing back in a meaningful way. And I think this is something where Democrats are going to have to sort of find their sea legs. And how can you push back against Donald Trump in a meaningful way that is actually going to make some difference? And I think you're right that they may have missed the mark on this first one. So, all right, let's go back to the phone lines. And we've got Stephen in Glenview, who's been waiting a long time. Hey, Steve, welcome to the Joan Esposito Show.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, just real quick, your comment about the Democrats having more of a spine and pushing back against the bully is right on. We have to figure out a way to do that, and we have to strategize, and we have to message better. And I think we all know that, but we got to figure out how to do that, and we better do it now.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to comment a couple of things. I had a comment on Dodge and on the oligarchy in Washington. And with regard to this Dodge dilemma, Bill Clinton did this in his term. And, it's not a pleasant thing, but he did it with the right way, not going around Congress and the Constitution. He went through Congress, as opposed to the way that Trump and Musk are doing it with cruelty and all the theatrics. And, the dirty little secret here is that with all the hype with these federal salaries, it's really it's a horrible thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. But I think we all agree that, you do need to reduce the government a bit, but it's how you do it. And it's only 6% of the total budget. And I don't know if people are paying attention, but the tax cut is going to totally negate what Musk is doing, and it's going to. I think you're talking about an additional $4 trillion to the national debt, and I remember, I think correctly, that Trump left one of the largest budget deficits we ever had. I think it was 50%, right?
I don't know the exact number, but it skyrocketed during the first Trump administration. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and he made a campaign challenge or campaign promise to get this, eliminate the national debt, and now he's actually going as far as after promising to end physical waste and fraud, which I think were his exact words. He's firing the inspector general. So
yes.
The insanity and hypocrisy of this is staggering.
You give the game away when you do that, right? When you say when you fire the people that are supposed to do that job, you're sort of giving away your true motivations. And as you were talking, I was thinking about USAID, right? This global effort to feed the hungry and to clothe people and to think about medications, and it's less than 1% of the budget. And this has been the one thing that Elon and Trump have really picked on, right? And they have all these examples, most of which are disinformation. And they argue that there's no accountability, there's no oversight, which is, again, completely untrue. USAID is audited regularly every single year. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some programs that maybe, like you said, there could be some cuts, or you could rethink the approach, right? Do we want to do more medication, more clothing, more cultural events? Like, those are all real conversations.
Right.
But when you're just saying, like, we're going to eliminate a program and make up why we think it's inefficient, that's not genuine.
Well, amen. You're exactly right. And let's fix the house and remodel it. Let's not burn it down. And I'll tell you something. All these farmers in western Kansas that are producing all this wheat that goes to USAID, they are not a bunch of happy campers right now. And
That's right.
This has ripple effect. That goes right down the line. And I think, as you know, USAID has done a great service to our country in terms of goodwill and, trying to help people in the world. I mean, what's wrong with that? That's not in the MAGA DNA, but I think it's in most Americans' DNA. But the other quick thing I wanted to mention, my friend, is that, this is really, it bothers me because for months and months and months, the MAGA crowd just railed against the so-called coastal and moneyed and tech elites, whoever the coastal elite. Anyway, they railed against the elites, and they pretended to appeal to the working class. And then I look at Trump's cabinet. His cabinet is made up of almost, even some of the sub-cabinet members are billionaires.
Yes.
These are oligarchs on steroids that have enough wealth to actually approach the gross domestic product of Belgium. This is what we got. And you talk about these are the true elites. We got conned. Didn't we?
Yeah, no, this is really, it's very thoughtful, Steve. A couple thoughts. To your earlier point, you know what? I think we're going to quickly learn that government matters, right? So when you take a chainsaw to a federal government and these programs, people are going to realize, whether it's the farmers or whether, it's our image abroad or whether it's, the veterans, that government actually does good work. Is it perfect? No. Are there times when it's bloated and inefficient? Absolutely. But there is a unique role for the government. And over time, that government is going to grow because it's meeting different needs. And I think when you follow the policies that the Trump administration is doing, it's going to be people that are hurt. And the really important point, the people who are going to be hurt the worst are those marginalized communities, right? So we're talking about people of color, poor people, right? They are going to feel this much more so than others. And I think that's maybe what's the most despicable thing. But to your final point about billionaires, yes. There are more billionaires in his cabinet than any other government in history. And there's an assumption there. They make an argument that just because you're smart in one area, it translates into another area, right? So because you've made $1 billion, in business, that you know how to run the Department of Education. I don't think that's true. Elon is the perfect example about a guy who can maybe be pretty smart about cars and rockets, but clearly knows nothing about auditing a government, has no skill set to do that. To be honest, Elon exposes himself as ignorant on most things as they relate to the government. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's firing nuclear scientists and then bringing them back. So I think the assumption that this idea that billionaires are going to know how to run a government is a really, really terrible one. And to your point, it leads to oligarchy, which is also really, really dangerous.
Exactly. I think and Trump hired these people, brought them on based on not on merit, but on loyalty. And I got to tell you, these ain't the best and the brightest. I think that's pretty clear.
No, I think that's right. And here's the thing: there are going to be consequences for that, right? If McMahon guts the Department of Education, there are real consequences to that. If we gut the NIH and funding for universities across the country that are doing cutting edge cancer research, there are people that are going to feel that pain, right? These are, in some, we can have these sort of hypothetical conversations, but what they are doing are going to impact people in real and meaningful ways. And I think those impacts are going to be felt sooner than we think. And it also gives me a little bit of optimism that this is all going to blow up in their face because they're so bad at it. They're more effective, but I still think they're bad at it.
I think you're right, and hopefully it will blow up in their faces and without causing a catastrophic situation for the American people.
Yes.
But but I appreciate your taking my call, and you do a great job I love your enthusiasm and your knowledge, and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you so much for calling in, Steve. I really think this is important discourse, and I'm glad we're having these conversations because it matters, right? It really, really matters. And overall, I'm so impressed with the conversations that we have here. This is important stuff. So we need to we're going to go up on a break in just a second, but we still have those phone lines open. When we come back after break, I'm going to play a clip from Sean Casten, who we've got at the 4:00 hour, and we're going to hear him get a little fired up about democracy and what's going on in the Trump administration. So those phone lines and those text lines are still open. So it's 773-763-9278, and we will be back in just a minute.
This is Tony Moray. I'm an estate planning lawyer who drafts living trusts and wills. Since the election, I've been hearing from my clients, many of them fellow WCPT listeners. And we all wonder, how did this happen and what can we do? The how is, of course, very complicated. My thoughts as regard to what we can do is simple but important. We need to take extra care of those we love. Having an estate plan using either a living trust or will can provide comfort in uncertain times like these. When the progressive values we hold dear are under attack, I feel we must make sure that our personal lives are secure and then work out from there. I've been drafting estate plans for my clients for over 30 years, and I will use all of that experience to help you. Please call me at 847-996-0496. My website is moreylawoffice.com. That's Morey spelled M-O-R-E-E. Again, the phone is 847-996-0496. There is no cost or obligation for our initial discussion. I look forward to speaking with you.
Imagine all the things you dream of under one roof. You're thinking of eBay. Fashion, collectibles, car parts, it's all there. Go find the thing that keeps you up at night. eBay. Things people love.
AP News, I'm Mike Hempen. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says the U.S. economy is in a good place, but there is uncertainty.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the overall economy is doing well.
Despite elevated levels of uncertainty, the U.S. economy continues to be in a good place. The labor market is solid, and inflation has moved closer to our 2% longer-run goal.
But Powell says the Fed's key interest rate is likely to remain unchanged in the coming months.
The new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy.
Most economists say that President Donald Trump's plans to place tariffs on various imports from Canada and Mexico will increase prices and slow growth. But many also expect that tax cuts and deregulation could boost the economy. I'm Donna Warder.
The Labor Department says U.S. employers added 151,000 jobs in February, up from 125,000 the month before. The unemployment rate last month was 4.1%. President Trump is considering sanctions on Russia.
The president says he's strongly considering new pressure, given Russia is, quote, absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now. His social media post comes days after he ordered the U.S. to pause military aid and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Asked if Vladimir Putin's taking advantage of the lull,
I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do.
The president again questioned whether Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is committed to a deal for ending the war.
It may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards.
Top Trump aides will meet with Ukrainian officials next week in Saudi Arabia. Sagar Meghani at the Pentagon.
This is AP News. Roads have reopened and rail services have been restored in Paris after a bomb disposal operation caused hours of chaos. The police operation that made the bomb safe before it was taken away triggered major disruption for hundreds of thousands of rail travelers and motorists. This traveler says his plan was simple: to get from Paris to London for a concert.
The last information is that they don't know if there will be any trains departing today. So they recommended to be sure to take a train, to book a train for tomorrow and extend our stay here.
Former central banker Mark Cleary appears set to become Canada's new prime minister after the governing Liberals announce a replacement for Justin Trudeau on Sunday. President Trump's threats to impose sweeping tariffs have sparked a surge in Canadian nationalism. I'm Mike Hempen, AP News.
This is 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Shave Marslick. Into tonight, the chance of rain and snow showers will continue before midnight under cloudy skies with a low around 28 degrees. North winds around 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday, we'll see lots of sunshine with a high near 46 degrees. West winds pick up at 5 to 15 and gusts as high as 25 miles per hour into the afternoon. Saturday night looks mostly clear at the low around 31 degrees. West winds at 5 to 15 and gusting as high as 25 miles per hour through the overnight. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Right now it's 36 degrees.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day. I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, step right up and prepare to be amazed. This is an ordinary folder. As you can see, no hidden compartments, and yet inside, it's an invisible rabbit. If you like that trick, you are going to love Donald Trump's national energy emergency. It's also totally imaginary, but as any good carnival barker will tell you, there's a sucker born every minute who falls for the shtick. Let's review the numbers. Under the Biden administration, U.S. created 16 million jobs, had the fastest growing economy in the OECD, held oil demand flat, drastically cut coal use, embraced cleaner, cheaper renewables and efficiency. We decoupled economic growth from fossil fuel, giving American people more heat, more light, more power, more money. That put downward pressure on domestic oil and gas prices, which caused domestic fossil producers to export into less developed, more remunerative overseas markets. Now, before you say there's no emergency here, consider this from the perspective of our poor oil and gas producers. They're losing market share. They're making less money, but they got an ally in Donald Trump. After all, he's the guy who forced the Saudis to curtail production in 2020 to drive up oil prices and oil industry profits. That's right. He made sure U.S. consumers paid more for gasoline. Ta-da! Don't be a sucker, but if you are, I am available for parties and I can solve all your invisible rabbit problems. You can keep hopping, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
That was Representative Sean Casten from the 6th District of Illinois, who's going to be joining us at 4 o'clock. So make sure to tune in. And, that was fantastic, right? The energy. A number of you, actually some of the texters as well, have been kind of talking about what the Democrats need. And I do think Sean Casten captures some of what is needed in terms of sort of mocking this, but also bringing some humor and some energy to all of it. So good on Sean Casten for that remarks. All right, let's jump back to the phone lines. We have Paul from Seattle. Paul, who's been waiting for 45 minutes. Thank you so much for patiently waiting, Paul. Welcome to the Joan Esposito Show.
Oh, thanks, Professor William. Yeah, I like Jim's idea about, this all requiring an opera or a play. The problem is that, a tragic character has a tragic flaw, but otherwise has many redeeming qualities. I don't think Trump has any redeeming qualities. He's a big bag of tragic flaws. So I don't know about, Shakespeare wrote comedies, tragedies, histories, but I don't think he wrote pathologies. So I don't know.
I like that line, big bag of tragic flaws. I think that's a good one. You should make T-shirts of that.
Yeah, a big baggy one.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me ask you this. Other than myself, no one talks about this because the remarks that Trump made, and certainly at the joint joint statement to the address to Congress, saying that we're going to get Greenland one way or another. We're going to get it. I mean, okay, people are writing this off as Trump being Trump, but I find that to be very serious thing to say. Offhand is one thing, but saying that before a joint session of Congress is outrageous. And does anybody really think that when he says that Russia doesn't have something to do with this? And I'll tell you what I think. I think that what he means by that is Russia is going to invade Greenland, and Trump is just not going to do anything to stop them. And that would take about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Occupy Greenland, and the only thing standing in the way, really, of Greenland being invaded is the United States. And then Russia would have a base and an outpost in the Western Hemisphere. And I think Putin wants that because I think historically he regrets that Russia sold Alaska to the United States. And, Greenland is about 25% larger than Alaska and probably more valuable, or every bit as much as valuable as Alaska. And then we would just split the spoils, all the trillions of cubic feet of natural gas and the oil and the rare earth metals would be Donald and Vladimir would put them together.
It's like gangster politics, right? I mean, and I think maybe that explains part of the appeal Putin has for Donald Trump, because they're both sort of these gangsters who just want to take things that aren't theirs. But I think, to your point, this is really serious stuff, right? I mean, Trump, in some ways, he jokes about Greenland, he jokes about the Panama Canal or making Canada the 51st states, but they shouldn't be joked about, especially in a congressional address. And there's been some reporting the last couple of days coming out of Canada where Canada doesn't feel like this is just a joke, that apparently behind the scenes, the Trump administration has said that there's some joint waters between the two that they have shared, and that the Trump administration has said they want those. And so this is a much more aggressive policy. So he's silly and joking about it, but I think it's very, very serious. And at the end of the day, if norms and all of these things that we've created in this post-World War II system about against interventionism is against aggression are supposed to matter, then you have to defend those things. And you can't be the bully threatening to take Greenland, threatening to take the Panama Canal, threatening to overtake, Canada, because you're then no better than Russia, which is this pariah state who violates, right? So all of that, it's such an important point. And I think it often is missed.
Well, I also think that to say in that travesty of a meeting with Zelensky last week, a week ago, to say things like you're toying with World War III in a negotiation is beyond the pale. It's over the top.
Yeah.
You don't say things like that. That's really serious stuff. And other than he's just playing for the camera.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've brought this up with some other people, but, Zelensky was – I think Zelensky, first of all, far outplayed Trump. The other thing, Trump and Vance showed how weak they are to the international stage by the way they played this. I mean, anybody who knows anything about negotiations, and I know that you do, knows that they broke every amateur rule in the book.
Yeah.
And, I mean, just to say you're toying – but when Trump was saying, and the shouting went over it, so you had to hear the clip several times to see what Zelensky said when Trump said, you don't have the cards, you don't have the cards. And Zelensky said, we are not playing cards. This is serious.
Yes, absolutely. He's trying to pull, and that's a good catch by you. Yeah, we're not playing cards. He's trying to pull this back to say, Mr. President, this is very, very serious. And Trump isn't being serious, to your point, because he wants this to be about theater. There are all sorts of negotiations that happen behind the scenes, and I am sure through the history of the United States that U.S. presidents have belittled other heads of state behind the scenes. But when you do so publicly, it's not accidental, it's intentional. And in some ways, J.D. Vance was he was the grenade thrower. He begins all of this. But the point, to your larger point, is to undermine Ukraine and to sidle up with Russia and all of that, which is, again, as somebody who grew up in the Cold War and grapples with those issues of Soviet Union and Russia, it really is. It's hard to wrap your head around where he is on these positions.
Yeah, I thought that when I realized that J.D. Vance was going to be there, I thought, well, first of all, that's very unconventional to have. That's like attacking on a chessboard with your king and your queen at the same time. No, you don't do that.
Exactly. Yes.
But to have them both in the same room and before any mid-level negotiations about the details haven't even been approached. But I thought, Vance is there. They're going to play good cop, bad cop. But no, they played bad cop and bigger idiot. That's what they did.
Right. Well, hey, Paul, I got to get to some other callers, but thank you so much for calling. Some really powerful insights there. And we should say, we've got some texters in, lots of texters today. Eric from Montgomery was also talking about Ukraine, and he said about the whole appreciation thing, this idea that Donald Trump said you should be thankful and appreciate us. We, the United States, should appreciate the Ukrainian fighting for freedom and democracy. Trump and the Republicans turned everything upside down. I think there's so much truth to that, right? I mean, this is about the greatest gift in terms of a fighting force that's willing to say, hey, we will go do the fighting. No U.S. troops, just help us fight that fight. And Donald Trump is very much against that. So that, it is flipping our geopolitical world upside down. All right, let's jump to Bill from Plainfield who wants to talk about Trump. Hey, Bill, thanks for waiting.
Hey, happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday.
So someone asked what the future generations will say.
Yeah.
And Jim from Chicago, I love that dude, by the way. What a genius. He mentioned Shakespeare. I think of all we got to do is show him the movie Idiocracy.
Yes.
And MAGA is obviously Idiocracy, the people in that movie. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it, but I know of it, and I've had other people tell me that I need to see it, right? Just because of, it's a good reflection.
Do your homework. homework. You're making money by listening to us callers, and you must see that movie.
Okay, sounds good. I will put it on my list.
Tom Hartman, the last show, asked about bumper stickers.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is more of a slogan, and you could join in at any time, too. You asked for it, you got it, Toyota, but cross Toyota. You asked for it, you got it, fascism. You asked for it, you got it, division. You asked, you could jump in any time.
No, these are all good.
You got it, racism.
Yep.
You asked for it. No, you got to jump in. You asked for it. You got it. Inflation.
Those are all good. I think you've got an entrepreneurial spirit there. I will say there is a space for all of this as well. One of the things that I think has been one of the most effective takedowns of Trump is humor and mockery. And so as we think about Democratic strategies, I think this is a space where you can sort of expose the clown for who he is. And so I'm on board, Bill.
How about the State of the Union? When he mentions, okay, we're not going to touch Social Security, start cheering and do not allow him to talk. Do it for an hour and a half.
Sure.
Do it until you lose your voice. Make that State of the Union last and keep saying USA, USA, like those a-hole Republicans trying to disrespect us Democrats. I felt personally disrespected when there's pointing and spitting and saying USA at us.
Yeah.
We do it constantly at them and don't allow him to talk with them. Just another way of legally, I guess.
Well, when politics becomes theater, right? And that's what Trump has done. Trump has turned politics not into substance, not into governance. Trump isn't concerned with governing. It's political theater that all benefits him. And some of that is social media. Some of that is, his speeches and whatnot. You have to respond in some ways in kind, right? You have to think about how do you connect with the people. And so, a theme throughout the show has been opera and Shakespeare and all of that. And I think the Democrats probably could benefit from being a bit more theatrical and drawing some of that attention away from Donald Trump. So, Bill, we got to move on. But thank you so much for the call. You brought a little levity and a little humor to our show today. So we are up against the break, and then we're going to come back, and then we got a bunch more callers we're going to have to get through. Maybe we'll do speed round with callers, but we will be right back after this on WCPT.
Out Chicago.
Kiddos, we all need to find the courage to stand up to people when they say things that are completely wrong. Like what Governor Pritzker said, we need to get ready when they sound that 5-alarm fire. We all need to be up there with buckets to douse the flames.
I'm ready.
I am too. This flamer is ready to douse the flame, and I never like to douse my flame.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820.
WCPT replay.
We're going to talk to Renato Mariotti. What are some of the things you would suggest folks do?
I think it's really important to actually get out there and volunteer and contribute and be on the front lines so that you're doing something, not just posting on social media. And I think it's also important in your own communities to be outspoken, to be an advocate, and to be helping candidates to try to make sure, because we're in less than 2 years, we're going to be right back here trying to undo some of this mess in a midterm election. Ultimately, having a defeatist attitude or an attitude where, well, we just, we might as well move to Canada or something like that, that's surrendering our country and millions of people who can't move to a fate that they don't deserve.
Keep listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Hey Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We got 4 more callers. We're going to have to go quickly through these callers, but I want to remind everybody, Monday on Choose Views, Richard Chu will be here taking your calls and talking to Illinois State Rep. Abdul Nasser Rashid, Paige Tubin, Educational Program Assistant Manager, Urban Growers Collective, and Rich Logis and Stefania Messina of Leaving MAGA. Sorry about that. I butchered that. Choose Views weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. Central on WCPT, Chicago's progressive talk for 12 20 years. Let's go back to the callers, and we got Roosevelt from Chicago who wants to talk about Marco Rubio. Hey, Roosevelt.
How you doing, Professor? Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
Well, here's a couple of things I want to bring up. One is, did you see the face on Marco Rubio when Trump said that he was going to work on
yes.
Panama Canal? All right, so that was a surprise there, Rubio. And speaking of Rubio, it went completely around, meaning that all those Cuban Americans that so-called defended the rights, the human rights, never lifted a finger to help the Venezuelans that came here the same way they came. Mm-hmm. Their uncles and dads and grandfathers came here, so that's one point. And second, I also want to talk about cards. When Trump said you don't have the cards, I think Trump showed his cards, meaning he directed that whole scenario last Friday with Zelensky to the point that even Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend brought up the fact that Zelensky didn't have a suit, or don't you have a suit, that type of thing, when Elon Musk was never asked to wear a suit when he was with his kid in a baseball cap. So that's one point. But back to Trump showing his cards. He showed the world. I think that backfired. I don't know what you think, Professor. He showed everybody how he does business, meaning people in other countries are going to say, we're never going to do business with this guy, because you have to not only take whatever he gives you, if he gives you anything, when it comes down to a deal, and you have to grovel. Yeah. It's not enough. You have to actually say thank you, sir, and all this because of what you said earlier. He loves the power. And last but not least, Joan Esposito brought this up plenty of times. He doesn't respect anybody. He doesn't listen to anybody. So I brought this up in another station in Spanish, and that he respects money, but more important, that people with money. So I believe that all these ideas of cutting, they're all coming from Elon Musk. Because remember, he doesn't have an original idea. He copies everything from other people. He takes and borrows from other presidents, such as Reagan. He borrowed from Reagan. He borrowed from Democrats, Republicans, to the point that even his own wife borrowed a speech from Michelle Obama.
Michelle Obama, yes, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is really... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, well, my point is, Professor, I'm gonna finish up right now.
Yeah.
My point is that he showed the whole world how he does business, meaning he exposed himself. He gave himself up. He showed his cards. I would love to play poker with that guy because he's a bluffer. He bluffs.
That's a great point, Roosevelt. And I think you're absolutely right in the sense that he's not hiding any of this, right? And I do wonder whether that will backfire to some degree. You know, we saw Trump and we saw an ugliness to that. And even some Republicans felt uncomfortable with the way that he was treating an ally. And you know, Trump only knows how to do business one way, and it's to crush and squash anybody who's in his way. And that's not how you do international politics. And to be honest, I think ultimately that's going to backfire on him. So really, really, thanks for sharing that, Roosevelt. All right, let's go to Rachel in Chicago who wants to talk about Elon Musk. Hey, Rachel.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, fine, thank you. Well, I don't understand why everybody thinks that Trump wins. She did not win the elections because Elon Musk offered $100,000 to anyone that registered to vote. So that is cheating. And she interfered in our elections. She didn't have any business to interfere. Nobody's supposed to interfere in the election.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy is illegal as president. But nobody says that.
No, this is, and what we're seeing is...
I don't understand what they don't understand. He didn't win.
Yes, and we're seeing Elon play this disproportionate role in Wisconsin right now. So Wisconsin has this really important Supreme Court race that's playing out, and Elon Musk is throwing money around there. And again, it gets this deeper issue, the Supreme Court issue of, Citizens United and is money speech? And the court has said that, yes, money is speech, but we see all the ways when this type of money can cause dangerous ripples in our democracy. And I think absolutely we need to grapple with this question in terms of, is it appropriate that the world's richest man has all of this influence in the election and in the governance as well? So there are so many things there as well. So thank you much for your call. I really appreciated hearing your voice on that. All right, we got a little bit of time left, and we got a couple more callers. Let's jump to Ron, Ron in Michigan, who wants to talk about cuts to the veteran program. Hey, Ron.
Yes, thank you. But before I do, the meeting with Trump and Zelensky, did you see the wrestling belt, the championship wrestling belt displayed in front of Zelensky? Everybody says they've never seen it, but it's there. You have to look. And that's the whole start of the show. This was a wrestling takedown show. And it was before Trump's audience, and they put the little guy down, okay? Yeah. The little guy came begging. All he had to offer was his country's blood and broken soldiers and people, okay? But that was not enough for the whatever you want to call him, okay? But that was the whole thing. It was a put down, a takedown, and his people loved it, okay? If his people. But here's what was going on right now. There's the artist Richard Gorey. He does the horror pictures. But this is what's happening. There's a dinner table, okay, and you have this family sitting there, and there's the reluctant guest, and it's a giant raven crow, and that's Trump, that's Musk, and the table is the American people, and this crow is holding his plate up. He wants more food. If he doesn't get the food, he's going to start eating those people with the cuts to Medicaid, the veterans, and all these, and that's what's happening. These billionaires are eating the poor. They're going to eat the poor. That's a literal saying, but that's going to happen. This is what's happened. And veterans, I cannot see how veterans who are dying of Agent Orange and this and that are going to sit quietly for Trump and this billionaire Nazi coming to our country and taking their benefits that they fought for, that they're dying from, okay, right now. And you're going to see, in my opinion, a horrible, whoever's going to happen to, backlash of veterans. Yeah. Because they're heavily armed, they're desperate in many cases, and I would hope before they even think of suicide, they go the other route and get revenge. Yes. It's simple.
Well, no, Ron, I think you're highlighting some really, really important things. And to your earlier point about Trump responding to power, right? I mean, that's the only thing he respects in this world is power. And it's part of the reason I think he finds Vladimir Putin appealing is because he's an old school gangster who throws his power around. So no, really, really interesting. And I think you're right. This is one hopes that seeing that side of Trump ultimately leads to his downfall. So, Ron, I got to scoot because we got to get to one more caller for the break. But thanks so much for calling in. All right, we've got time for one more. I think is it Eduardo calling from Tampa? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good afternoon. I got to make this quick because we're coming to the end here. So President Trump is going to do a study on why eggs are going up. We already know that. 2 words, bird flu. Yeah. And also, this is up your profession here, Colombia, because of these anti-Palestine, he's pulling $400 million in grants. Now, what are the people who go to that school didn't protest? They're going to be hurt by that.
Absolutely, right? I mean, you think about that, and that's money it's targeting for research grants. That is really, really important work. And I mean, again, that's a huge amount that's being pulled. For what reason? Because you're angry at a small group of protesters, right? It shows there's an inability to adapt to anybody who pushes back against Trump. You're right. It's such a huge story. The Colombia stuff. I hope that gets more attention.
Definitely. All right, Bob. Have a good weekend.
All right. Thank you so much for calling in. Yeah, no, this is, I think it's, there are so many things that are happening, right, that occur very, very quickly, and it's hard to make sense of them all, and it's hard to cover all of them. And this story out of Colombia, the government's decision, the Trump's administration decision to cut $400 million in research grants. I mean, these are, as somebody who works at an institution of higher ed that deals with grants, not to the same degree as Columbia, but this is meaningful work. It's important work. It's scientific work. I mean, this is part of what makes the United States the most dynamic economy in the world, is having this cutting edge research that we are doing. And countries around the world look at the U.S. higher education system with envy. China would love to have the higher education system that the United States has. People from all around the world come to the United States for the educational opportunities we offer. And the Trump administration targeting that and undermining that, it really hurts what is part of the best of the United States, right? So the higher education and learning and research and all of that is so valuable. All right, we are up against a break and we got to get out of here. Thanks for all the callers. When we come back, Dr. Philip Barker from Keene State College is going to join us, and we're going to talk about all the things world politics. We'll see you then.
Millions of Americans take medicine like Ozempic and Zepbound. Many of them are overpaying by thousands of dollars a year. These GLP-1 medications for diabetes, weight loss, and more may not always be covered by your insurance, but GoodRx can help. GoodRx helps you save every month on prescriptions at over 70,000 pharmacies nationwide. Best of all, it's free to use. Check GoodRx to save on GLP-1s. Just go to GoodRx.com/GLP. That's GoodRx.com/GLP. GoodRx is not insurance, but can be used instead of insurance, including Medicare and other federal and state-funded programs.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center and meteorologist Shave Marslick. Into tonight, the chance of rain and snow showers will continue before midnight under cloudy skies with a low around 28 degrees. North winds around 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday, we'll see lots of sunshine with a high near 46 degrees. West winds pick up at 5 to 15 and gusts as high as 25 miles per hour into the afternoon. Saturday night looks mostly clear at the low around 31 degrees. West winds at 5 to 15 and gusting as high as 25 miles per hour through the overnight. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 37 degrees.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Because that's how we roll. Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We are going to get to Phil Barker in just a second, but before we do, I want to remind everybody that Monday during this time slot, I'll be here again filling in for Joan, and my guests will include Suzanne Chad, who's going to talk about the dumpster fire that is American politics, Robert Rowland, who's a professor of rhetoric and communications at the University of Kansas, who wrote a book on Trump's rhetoric and nationalism, really interesting stuff, and then Lauren Chu, the communication director at the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. That's live, local, progressive, weekdays from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT. All right. We are now joined by one of my favorite people. That's Dr. Phil Barker, who's a professor of political science and director of the honors program at Keene State College in Keene, New Hampshire. He teaches courses on international relations and comparative politics. He does research that looks at the role of religion in national identity and conflict. He also has the distinction of being my podcast partner on our weekly podcast called The Politics Lab. And you all probably remember Phil Barker. Welcome back to WCPT, Phil.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. Absolutely. So, well, Phil, it was a week ago today that the debacle, the Zelensky-Donald Trump debacle in the Oval Office happened. We've seen a number of fallouts since then, more conversation about what's going on with the United States and Ukraine and Russia. But let's just start. I'm curious about your reaction to watching that play out in the White House. What were you thinking and sort of how were you processing it all?
There's so much, as is the case with so many news stories these days. There's so much about just that one interaction that you could sort of break down. It was, when you and I were talking earlier this week on the podcast, we talked about it. It was just shocking to see an American president talking to. Absolutely to see him talking to an ally that way. But it's really remarkable to see the president talking to any other world leader that way. This is the sort of, you don't see presidents address, enemy states with the sort of, the attacking sort of disrespectful approach that you saw Donald Trump take towards Zelensky in the Oval Office. So that part alone was remarkable to see. And then when you get into the substance of what was actually playing out, the attacking, basically taking Russia's side, dressing down President Zelensky of Ukraine and accusing. I mean, it was victim blaming, right? To accuse him of the sort of ongoing war, to say that he was the problem. I mean, every bit of that is unbelievable. And again, that doesn't even touch on the fact that this is like breaking with almost 100 years of foreign policy precedent that the U.S. has had in terms of supporting Europe, supporting democracy, standing up to authoritarian states, standing up to Russia, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I don't even know like which of those many things is like the one that has that troubles me the most.
Yeah.
But they all trouble me. When you watched it, what stood out to you?
Yeah, it's sort of the same reaction. The initial one was just that dynamic that you would have forgotten that Ukraine was a wartime ally. The way that the Trump was interacting with Zelensky, and also I think thinking about the role of J.D. Vance in all of this as well, right? This was an opportunity for J.D. Vance to sort of reassert himself in the administration by rolling this grenade into the Oval Office and getting this fight going. So there's that sort of interpersonal dynamics. But to the point that you made about upending 80 years of U.S. foreign policy consensus, that's the thing that has been sticking with me. Democrat and Republican since the end of World War II have realized that our allies are in Europe and that Russia and during the Cold War, the Soviet Union really were the enemies, right? And there are reasons for that, anti-democracy and history of intervention and all of that. And Donald Trump, in one 45-minute moment, he upended 80 years of U.S. foreign policy, or is attempting to. We'll see whether that's the case or not. But it's so dramatic, right? And you saw that reaction, and maybe that's, I'd be curious to get your takes on this too. The reaction from Europe, within hours, you saw heads of state across Europe putting up on social media support for Ukraine. And then that next day, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, brought all of NATO, except for the United States, to London as a sign of support with Zelensky. They all took pictures with Zelensky. So what do you think? What does this do for this sort of transatlantic alliance between the United States and Europe? This also is sort of upended as well.
Yeah. I don't think we can say that the transatlantic alliance is dead, but it is certainly ailing. It is
life support. Yes.
We talked about it during the first Trump administration. You and I did a lot of talking about how damaging it was long term to the sort of American-European alliance, just in the sense of in the first Trump presidency, the attacks on NATO, the threats, the fact that Trump was the first president who refused to essentially openly state that we would come to the aid of NATO allies if need be. That all had this long-term impact, because the instant that you start to doubt whether or not America actually supports NATO, then it becomes rational. It becomes necessary for European countries to start thinking about what it looks like without America. And so I think that damage was done in the first term. And I think this is of such a different level, right? This is the Trump administration not sort of hemming and hawing and pushing about how European allies need to do more for themselves. This is the Trump administration talking openly about how this old world alliance is over, right? Talking about how Europe is basically on its own, talking about sort of removing the kind of long-standing nuclear protections that we promised to Europe. And so Europe has to start thinking about what this looks like, because again, if Russia were to in fact push forward in any way, like there's no belief at this point that the U.S. would be there to help our allies. So yeah, I mean, it is. I think it is such a momentous turning point in like the state of world politics in general, right? Like we're seeing a shifting of alliances. Like we are at a point where the U.S. is siding with the sort of anti-democratic authoritarian states over European allies. It's really mind-boggling, and it's like can't be like overstated just how damaging this is long term and how long it will take to recover from this. Because again, even if Donald Trump goes away, right? Even if I think the first term Europeans saw this as like maybe hopefully a passing thing. I think at this point, even if Donald Trump is ousted from office and some very pro-European state comes along, you would have to, as a European country, still think about the U.S. differently, because that threat of the U.S. sort of taking its toys and going home is going to be there moving forward.
This is such an important point, right? I mean, I think about this as like tectonic plates. That's the kind of shift that we're seeing. This is an upheaval of a system that has been in place, and for good reason as well, right? And I mean, you were talking about that the United States is now siding with Russia and Iran and North Korea, and that was the vote at the United Nations this last week, where this was a vote on the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine to condemn this as an act of aggression. And the United States sided with, Nicaragua, Russia, North Korea, Iran, all of these countries. Suddenly the United States we're saying we're with them. So that visual is just stunning. But to your deeper point, there are real costs to this, right? Donald Trump talks about alliance structures as if, we're the one bearing all the costs. He talks about this all the time with NATO, even though he gets the data wrong. He talks about all these NATO countries are in arrears as if they owe dues, and that's not how it works. But that they're the ones that are benefiting from the United States. And there's no doubt that the United States benefits those European allies, but we also benefit from the allies in Europe. We benefit from our relationship in Asia, with Australia and all these other countries, because they trust in the United States. They trust that the United States is going to be around and they will support them. I think a lot about Australia lately. Australia has embraced the United States and said, yes, we will help you balance against China. Well, if I'm Australia right now, I'm a little worried, because I don't know, is the United States really going to help me if push comes to shove? And now I've picked a fight with China, right? So much of this alliance structure is based on trust that you build up over years and years. And to your point, once you break that, you can't just fix it overnight. So even if Donald Trump goes away and you get a new sort of Joe Biden who loves the liberal international order, it doesn't get fixed overnight. I'm really, really worried about that.
Well, and it upends so much else. Like the Australia example you used is a really fascinating one in the sense of, like, if you're Australia, you're nervous. But I also think about it from the flip side, which is if you're China and you've had your sights set on Taiwan for decades, like, now is your moment, right? There's not like the idea that when the U.S. is siding with Russia in this particular moment, if the U.S. and U.S. promises to Taiwan, implicit or explicit, however you want to look at it, if that's part of what is deterring China, like that deterrence goes away. Why wouldn't China make a move? So in that, again, right, if that happens, like, this is where that's not something that is undone within another election. The other part of this that I think is really important to sort of recognize is we're not, the Trump administration, and I think a lot of Trump supporters sort of frame this as like Ukraine's not in it's not in America's interest to get bogged down in Ukraine, or the money would be better spent in other ways. But that is not reflected in the policy that the Trump administration is putting together, because this is not a Trump administration that is saying, hey, we're going to back away from Ukraine, like, we're going to focus inward. That's not what's happening, right? The U.S., when it votes with Russia, it's not saying, hey, Russia's wrong, but this isn't our problem. It's saying Russia's not wrong. We're siding with Russia, and it's not, it's across the board. That's what's happening, right? That's the exchange with Zelensky. Like, this is not saying we believe that, Ukraine has a right to defend itself, but we're not responsible for it, which I would disagree with that stance, but it at least is a stance. This stance is like, we're fully supportive of Russia and doing real things to aid Russia, right? Cutting off military aid to Ukraine, cutting off the sharing of intelligence with Ukraine. Today, apparently, we told our allies that they were not allowed to share American gathered intelligence with Ukraine, right? So across the board, we are working against Ukraine, not just like getting out of it, right? We are still as involved as we were. We're just involved on the wrong side.
And so clearly, like, you and I talk a lot about, with international politics, there's a lot of gray. It's rare that there's a clear, black and white, good and bad, right? Morality is always messy at the international level, but this is one instance where it's clear who the good guy and who the bad guy is, right? Russia is the bad guy. They were the one that aggressively invaded Ukraine. They are the one that engaged in war crimes. They are the one who've taken thousands of children from Ukraine and pulled them back. I mean, they are the ones that have targeted hospitals and apartment complexes. I mean, they are, unlike most examples in international politics, it's pretty easy to say that on balance they are the bad guys. And for some reason Trump is saying, like, I like them, right? And the US has not always been perfect. We have done things that aren't great, but on balance the United States has sort of grounded itself to say we are a moral country and we will make some mistakes, but we're going to try to do good. And this strikes me as just such a clear example of supporting bad, right? It's as if, Trump has said Putin's the kind of gangster I like to deal with, and so I'm going to deal with him, and morality doesn't matter. Am I being too bleak, Phil? No. I mean, I think that's what's fascinating about it to me is that it's not. We're not doing this for, we're not doing this to support right? Yeah. We're not on the side of morally right. We're not on the side of our allies. We're not on the side of economically, right? Our ties to Europe are far more important than our ties to Russia. And so that's the other part is that we're on the wrong side of this morally and ethically, but it's also there are political scientists. There are people who say that, a foreign policy should be amoral, that it shouldn't be weighed down by morality. It should be weighed down by you should be focused on self-interest and security. This is kind of classic realism stuff. Yeah. But when I look at this, and there's debate about what that means, right? Like realism, and there's, disagreements about what's in America's best interest and all of that. But when I look at this, I can't figure out what is in our interest here, right? Like the motivation for Donald Trump is baffling to me, right? I don't understand what we get out of this other than unless you go to these purely sort of egoistical sort of it's that he likes Vladimir Putin or Vladimir Putin flatters him, or on the flip side of it, this sort of negative, the others are critical of him. And so he's going to, side, whatever. Democrats are supportive of Ukraine and France and Britain have been critical of Donald Trump's presidency. And so he's going to, I don't know, antagonize them. There's nothing in terms of U.S. foreign policy that makes sense, that's rational or beneficial or in America's self-interest here by doing this. Again, you could argue that it's America's self-interest to put less money towards it, but that's different from saying it's in America's self-interest to take Russia's side in this. That's right. No, the process and the position matters here. And I think to your point, this is less about we, right? It's more about, I think, Donald Trump and what his interests are, which are hard to know and I think are very narcissistic and nihilistic. So we've got to take a quick break here, but we will be back with Phil Barker, and we're going to talk a little bit about tariffs, and Phil's going to tell us whether this tariff stuff is good or bad. We'll be right back just after this.
WCPT Replay.
Joining me now is WCPT radio host Edwin Eisendrath.
Do we live in an era where the people's representatives make the laws and we have an executive branch that carries them out, or are you gone now? Are you just gone? And we have, the king says what the laws are, and the king carries them out. And by the way, if the courts don't agree, too bad, because that is tyranny. That our founders knew it was tyranny, and every generation of Americans until now knew that was tyranny. And many generations of Americans, Joan, went to war and fought and died because they knew that was tyranny. And I expect our generation, well, I'm old, I expect younger Americans will not put up with this. They will come to see it, maybe not immediately, but they will come to see it for what it is.
Keep listening to WCPT 820. Because facts matter.
This is a WCPT Veteran Minute. Captain Hugh Mulzack's love for the sea started after he finished high school, as he served the British Sooners and in 1918 immigrated to the United States. Within 2 years of joining the Marines, Mulzack earned his Shipping Master Certificate, the first African American to do so. In 1921, Mulzack was promoted to the rank of captain. In 1942, the SS Booker T. Washington, the first ship to be named after an African American, was created, and Mulzack was offered the position of captain, but he turned it down at first as the Marines did not want to have an integrated crew. Mulzack stood firm on his beliefs, stating, "Under no circumstances will I command a Jim Crow," and Mulzac became the first African-American captain of the first ever integrated crew. Under Captain Mulzac, over 18,000 troops were sent to the European war front, and ships carrying tanks, aircrafts, and ammunition to United States troops in World War II. This has been a WCPT Veteran Minute.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We are currently in conversation with Phil Barker, who's a professor of political science at Keene State College, studying international politics and comparative politics. Before the break, we were talking about Russia and Ukraine and the U.S. position. Phil, let's transition and talk a little bit about tariffs. Donald Trump has been oscillating back and forth, putting 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, adding tariffs to China, then pulling them back and then adding them. What do we make of this sort of haphazard tariff policy that we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
So I think it's important to start with this notion that not all tariffs are always bad, right? There are useful times for tariffs, but they're useful in a targeted, intentional sort of way. And so, you and I have talked about, the U.S. has used tariffs in the past to respond to unfair trade practices from, China, other countries who are not playing by the sort of agreed upon rules of fair trade, of free trade. And in those cases, using it as a tool to protect domestic industries or to, get some sort of leverage, it makes sense. It does not make sense in this sort of bulk, blunt force tool kind of way that Donald Trump is doing it. There's no nonsense. I think when you talk about, there's no logic, there's no consistency to this. And so you talk about haphazard, and I think that's the key thing, right? It feels like Donald Trump likes, he likes feeling powerful. He likes to push people around. He likes to be the bully. And that's what it feels like we're seeing play out here. But there's so many parallels to what we talked about a few minutes ago with Russia, in that I can't figure out everything about this is counterproductive. It's harmful to the American economy. It's harmful to our alliances. And it's not just harmful in a the stock market's going to be down for a month and then it'll bounce back kind of way. It's harmful in the long term. This will impact how other countries view us, whether they see us as a reliable and consistent trading partner or not. There will be a price to pay, certainly for the American people who have to spend more on goods, but it will be a long-term price, in that it's going to be harder to develop, fruitful and profitable trade relations with other countries in the future. It is one of those where, again, I don't, other than thinking about it through the lens of Donald Trump's personality, it doesn't make sense to me. What do you think? Is there any logic to all of this?
No, I've been talking to every single economist that will hear me, right, or meet with me, and asking them, and to the point, they will make the point you make, that sometimes strategic or targeted tariffs, against a particular country in a particular industry can be short-term beneficial. But the way, when you just do blanket tariffs, we've seen the markets, right? The markets don't like this. The auto industry doesn't like this. And what's even worse is that Donald Trump is not even committed to them, right? Because his point is, if I were to embrace his arguments that, hey, we have to put up these tariff barriers to trade to protect U.S. industries and manufacturing will come back. Well, if that's the case, you have to commit long-term to them. But he changes, day to day, so it doesn't really make any sense. And to a sort of deeper point you were hinting at as well, this is also a system, just like the security alliance coming out of World War II that the U.S. created, and NATO and all of that. This is also a world order that the United States created coming out of World War II, realizing that tariffs and economic nationalism and what they call beggar thy neighbor policies, where you're basically, putting up barriers to trade, led to World War II. So there are a lot of reasons for keeping the world interconnected and fostering trade. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't, inequalities, and you don't have to think about a lot of other challenges to global trade, but the way in which he is approaching it is this, just this chainsaw that is going to lead to negative effects and undermine the system that has benefited so much because of this free trade system.
Your reference back to, there's been for a long time, a lot of people have referenced the eerie similarities between the 20 teens and the 2020s and the 19 teens and the 1920s. And I'm ready for those parallels to stop.
Me too.
Seem to be whether it's the rising nationalism, rising inequality, all of these things. I mean, when I think about this, I like, again, just from a political science perspective, you're exactly right. Like from a leadership perspective, we see how this is affecting markets, right? Like markets like predictability. They don't like unpredictability. They don't like arbitrary policies. And we're seeing that in, this week, the market's having the worst week it's had, the stock market's having the worst week it's had in years, right? But those same things are playing out, like you were saying, in this international system. So just like we talked about with Europe and the Security Alliance, right? If you're Canada, again, we benefit massively from trade with Canada and from with Mexico, right? Our top two trading partners. We're gonna, if we do this sort of stuff, if you're Canada, if you're Mexico, up to this point, it has been a safe relationship. It's been a productive, positive relationship, and you are happy to be tied to America. But with this sort of stuff happening, it becomes reasonable. It becomes rational. It becomes logical to want to, like, at least partially, if not completely, start to sort of step away from the American economy. Because if it can change on a whim with a given president, I mean, this sort of stuff, it is the values of kind of, free trade, democracy that America has been committed to. It's clear the message we're sending is we're not committed to those anymore. And if I'm if I'm Justin Trudeau, I start to look to build relationships and stronger ties to other countries. It just doesn't, and that, again, doesn't go away, right? That it's that trust thing, right? Like even when Donald Trump goes away, if you're Canada, it starts to make sense to diversify away from America. The other part of this is the credibility matters, right? In that, this is where at some point people start to not actually believe what the president is saying because he's changing his mind every 2 weeks about whether we're going to have massive tariffs or no tariffs. And like that is a recipe, a lack of credibility in a leader, whether it's economic or military or whatever. That lack of credibility is what opens the door to all sorts of mistakes, miscommunications, miscalculations. Like it's a disaster of a foreign policy. If you're going to do something, you have to be at least clear about it, intentional about it, and consistent about it.
Right. And if you are Canada, and you have to feel bad for Canada because they're a close ally of the United States. I mean, they fought alongside the United States after 9/11, and they look at this as it's just not serious, right? So Donald Trump says, okay, we're going to impose 25% tariffs. Oh, wait, I'm going to give you a month to think about it. And then, okay, now we're going to do it again. And now we're going to pull back on cars. If you're Canada, it's hard to know how to even respond, right? Because you can't respond in that haphazard way. And I think what Canada said, until all the tariffs are gone, we're going to keep our tariffs in effect because we're going to be serious about this. So the lack of seriousness on the Trump side of things makes it even more complicated to deal with. And again, these are our friends. So as you think about, in the last segment, we were talking about Trump attacking an ally and a friend in Ukraine who's trying to do the right thing, fight against authoritarianism, promote democracy and protect democracy. The same thing here. You would want to preserve that friendship, that relationship, because you benefit over the long term for having that relationship, both security-wise and economic-wise. And it feels like sabotage. And again, to your point, it doesn't make rational, logical sense. It's not a sound foreign policy. And it's even more frustrating when you have individuals, around Trump who echo these points that everybody knows are inaccurate.
Well, that part, one of the things I found myself thinking about over the last week is that last point you said about who Trump is surrounded by. And there was lots of talk in the first Trump administration about how Trump was surrounded by adults and professionals, right? Whether when it came to military policy, he had generals around him. He had, whether you agreed with their policies or not, you had, Rex Tillerson and others who were at least these sort of serious individuals. And I think what you have, what it feels like to me more, we had talked about how this term Trump was going to be sort of more untethered because he had surrounded himself with, yes men, with sycophants, with people who were going to go along with whatever, with loyalists. And I feel like both of these things, Russia and the tariffs, I feel like maybe we're seeing I feel like we are seeing some of that, which is, I feel like these random whims, these back and forth, these sort of nonsensical things were around in the first term, but he had people around him who basically buffered him from the actual implementation of those policies often. And we don't have that now, right? And so what's happening is we're seeing American foreign policy go on these massive whims, these illogical, self-inflicted, like we're causing harm to ourselves because we have people around him who aren't willing to push back. And that concerns me as much as anything else, right? Because if that's what foreign policy is going to look like for 4 years, who knows what other whims and bizarre things come into Donald Trump's head that then become policy.
If you're willing to derail the economy just because of the whims, right? And your people aren't offering you good advice, you're right. What other mistakes might they be willing to make? And, there's been lots of coverage of Marco Rubio sitting on that couch in that meeting between Trump and Zelensky and sitting next to J.D. Vance, right? And J.D. Vance, he's enjoying this moment, right? I think J.D. Vance and his ideology sort of enjoys the belittling of somebody who's weaker than them. But Marco Rubio knows that Trump is wrong, right? He knows that he's wrong, and he knows that what's happening here is not right. I mean, Marco Rubio has defended Ukraine, and to have him change positions, to your point, is really troubling, because some of these guys don't know better, but Marco Rubio does know better, and he's even willing to do so. Phil, I always enjoy our conversations. We talk all the time, but I still feel every time we chat, I learn something from you.
Me too. This is like therapy in the time of Trump. Getting to talk through things with you, make more sense of it. It's wonderful. I always like it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again. We've been speaking with Phil Barker, Professor Phil Barker from Keene State College. Thank you so much, Phil. We are up against the break, and so we will be right back with Representative Sean Casten.
When it comes to banking, you need a bank you can trust. A bank with a rock-solid reputation and the highest integrity. A bank that gives you the attention and respect you deserve.
ABOC first opened its doors in downtown Chicago in 1922, and we've made our name on deep expertise, best-in-class service, and a strong commitment to our customers. We know the Chicago business market inside and out and can help you craft the perfect banking solution, no matter what type of business you're in.
And if you're looking for a banking partner for your labor union, we can bring the type of expertise that only comes from a bank that was founded by labor unions and still has union employees and shareholders to this day.
Whether you need a deposit account, loan, trust services, or investment management, ABOC has you covered. Let's work together to manage your finances today while planning for a better tomorrow. ABOC, a bank built on a strong foundation.
Visit aboc.com to learn more. Member FDIC.
Imagine all the things you dream of under one roof. You're thinking of eBay. Fashion, collectibles, car parts, it's all there. Go find the thing that keeps you up at night. eBay. Things people love.
AP News, I'm Mike Hempen. The Federal Reserve is likely to keep its key interest rate unchanged in the coming months. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says recent policy is uncertain.
The new administration is in the process of implementing significant policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. It is the net effect of these policy changes that will matter for the economy and for the path of monetary policy. While there have been recent developments in some of these areas, especially trade policy, uncertainty around the changes and their likely effects remains high.
Many economists say Trump's plans to slap tariffs on a wide array of imports will push up prices and slow growth. The Trump administration is canceling millions of dollars in grants and contracts with Columbia University.
The Trump administration says it is pulling $400 million from Columbia University. Multiple federal agencies announced that they are canceling grants and contracts because of what the government describes as the Ivy League school's lackluster efforts to squelch anti-Semitism on campus. Before the announcement, Columbia was ramping up its own investigations into students critical of Israel, alarming free speech advocates. Nonetheless, Federal Education Secretary Linda McMahon says Columbia has abandoned its obligation to Jewish students. Columbia is vowing to work with the government to try to get the money back. I'm Lisa Dwyer.
Authorities say actor Gene Hackman died of heart disease and showed severe signs of Alzheimer's disease a full week after his wife died of hantavirus in their home. Authorities initially ruled out foul play after the bodies were discovered in late February. His wife was found with an open prescription bottle and pills scattered on a bathroom counter. Hickman was found in the home's entryway. It was a wild end to the week on Wall Street, but stocks did end higher. This is AP News. An Olympic snowboarder is wanted in the U.S.
There's a $10 million reward for information leading to the arrest of a former Olympic snowboarder for Canada who is wanted for running a multinational drug trafficking network and planning multiple murders related to the ring. The FBI has added 43-year-old Ryan Wedding to its 10 most wanted list, while also announcing the State Department's $10 million offer. Wedding was charged last June with murder and drug crimes. Those charges were augmented in September in an indictment that alleged Wedding and others arranged the shipment of some 60 tons of cocaine a year. Wedding finished 24th in the 2002 Olympics. I'm Haya Panjwani.
A federal judge is set to hear arguments today over whether he should block immigration agents from conducting arrests at schools. I'm Mike Hempen, AP News.
This is 8:20 a.m. WCPT Willow Springs and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Shave Marslick. Into tonight, the chance of rain and snow showers will continue before midnight under cloudy skies with a low around 28 degrees. North winds around 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday, we'll see lots of sunshine with a high near 46 degrees. West winds pick up at 5 to 15 and gusts as high as 25 miles per hour into the afternoon. Saturday night looks mostly clear at the low around 31 degrees. West winds at 5 to 15 and gusting as high as 25 miles per hour through the overnight. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 36 degrees.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We are thrilled and excited to be joined by our next guest, the U.S. Congressman representing the 6th District of Illinois, Representative Sean Casten. Welcome, Representative Casten. Thank you so much for joining us on WCPT.
My pleasure. It's been a while, but nice to be back with you.
Absolutely, yes. So let's start with the news of the day, which is this growing concern, even within Trump's cabinet, appears, of the role and influence of Elon Musk. Now, you have been a vocal critic of Elon's role and even suggesting on social media that this may be a good opportunity for mass civil disobedience. Can you walk us through the concerns you have with Elon's role in the government?
So there's a quote I like to remind my colleagues of lately that Louis Brandeis, back in the 30s, said that when you have great concentrations of wealth in society, you only have three choices. You can let the government take over the wealth, which is to embrace communism. You can let the wealth take over the government, which is to embrace fascism, or you can break up the wealth and embrace competition. And that was how he justified bolstering what became the Sherman Antitrust Act. And we are now in a situation where someone who was never confirmed, who has great wealth, who has massive conflicts of interest, is running through data systems, accessing taxpayers' private information. You know, as I said in Financial Services this week, you know, in the name of Ayn Rand, we should be furious. They are firing people who they are legally not allowed to fire. They are cutting funding in places that they are legally not allowed to cut funding. Congress has the power of the purse, and they're able to get away with this in part because, you know, we have a sundowning narcissist in the White House who may not know that he's currently being a victim of elder financial abuse, but more significantly, because we have leadership in the House and Senate in the form of Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson, who seem to believe that Congress doesn't have to do oversight anymore. And if the executive branch is not going to execute the legislation that the legislative branch crafts, and the legislative branch is also not going to do oversight, what is the point of Congress?
This is I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just a real concern. Like, I mean, there's a scenario where someone of Musk's talents and abilities might have a role in Congress, but it's not one where you first fire all the inspectors general, fire the whistleblowers, don't have him confirmed, and then just let him run around data systems that he's not that he's got economic conflicts of interest in. So it's a five-alarm fire.
You know, you're mentioning the point that Congress sort of is ceding its power back to the president. I think as you know, it's been one of the more troubling things. On that note, I'm curious about how you see the first 45 days of the Trump administration, and how are you understanding what's going on? I will say the academic world, the political science world, those of us who study democracy, we're terrified and we're ringing the alarm bells. Feels like the first time since the Civil War where the future of the democracy is genuinely at stake. You know, is that your sense as well? How are you all understanding what we're watching play out?
We're neck deep in a constitutional crisis. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. If we were to end the Trump administration tomorrow, it would probably take a decade to repair the damage. I mean, think about the fact that how much information have we given to our adversaries in Russia and China? I don't know, but I know that a lot of people with unclassified access have been snooping around data files. If you were a NATO country and we had a Democratic president tomorrow who said, I'm going to fix everything Trump just broke, would you believe that the United States would back, or would you believe that your relationship with the United States as historically the leader of the free world is only durable until the next Republican administration comes in? That's really scary. And the fact, you know, I mean, I understand you didn't mean it this way, but when you said, you know, Congress is broken, it is the Republican Party in Congress that is broken, not Congress. When the Democrats were in control, we passed the biggest infrastructure bill in history, the biggest expansion, the biggest climate bill in history. We expanded NATO, right? Congress was working quite well. But right now we're in this situation where, you know, the baby's playing with a gun, right? And Congress has the ability to take the gun away, but the Democrats don't have the gavels. We can't get subpoenas without the Republican leadership's assent. And, you know, I think the best I could say of Speaker Johnson is that he is too much of a coward to do his job.
Given that circumstance and given the dire world that you're seeing there, what are strategies for confronting Trump? Republicans, if they're not going to take the lead on this, what are effective ways of slowing down or countering what we're seeing play out?
So I was talking to a bunch of poli-sci students at St. Xavier University this morning, and this was the conversation with a lot of them, and are concerned. And the point that I was making to them is that our founders created a government that was predicated not only on making sure that we put people of virtue into elected office, but also that we trust that the people who elect them are also virtuous and will do their duty. And I continue to believe the overwhelming majority of Americans are good and decent people. They're a little scared right now, but I think this is an opportunity to recognize that the fear that is contagious when we see people cower down in the face of a bully and we think, boy, I don't want to stand up or he might come after me. The flip side of that is that courage is also contagious.
Yeah.
And, you know, we saw it. You know, if you look back to the civil rights era, it wasn't because, you know, a member of Congress gave a great speech. It was because people on the ground said, I'm going to demonstrate with righteous virtue the right thing to do. And that courage becomes infectious, right? Just a few years ago when the Parkland students showed that same kind of courage and all of a sudden people were marching in the streets. I'm not saying Congress doesn't have a role here. I'm just saying that all of us have agency in demonstrating what is good and true and being loud about that and reminding everybody that we are fundamentally good people. But we've all got to acknowledge the stakes and we got to be loud.
It's an empowering message, right? That the masses, the demos, can actually play a role in this. I'm curious about what's going on. I'm always curious about what's going on in the mind of politicians when they do bad things. You know, do they know they're doing bad things and do them anyway, or have they convinced themselves that the bad things they're doing are actually good? And I'm not really interested in what's going on in Trump's head, but I am curious what you're seeing among congressional Republicans when the cameras are not on and it's an unfiltered moment. Do they express the same type of grave concerns that you have, or do you think they've convinced themselves that these are actually good times? Like, what do you think's going on in their minds?
I mean, look, we all contain multitudes, but I'll maybe just give you a couple anecdotes.
Yeah.
We led the effort to force the release of Matt Gaetz's ethics report, and that was basically to block him from becoming the head of the DOJ. Number one, it should have come out anyway, but we could use a privileged resolution in the House to force that information out, and We brought it to the floor. We only got one Republican to vote with us, which was not enough, but that pressure did lead to the Ethics Committee releasing the report, which is horrific. But thankfully, Matt Gaetz is not running is not the Attorney General right now. After that vote, I had 4 separate Republicans come up to me and thank me for bringing it forward, even though they'd all voted no. And I said, well, if you think it was a good idea, why didn't you vote for it? And, there were slightly different stories, but the gist of all their stories was politically that would have been bad for me, but I'm really glad you're doing it. And within there is, you want to be as empathetic as you can. And when on a separate matter, I asked one of my colleagues, what would it take for you to stand up? And he immediately said, how'd that work out for Kinzinger? And I think there is a fear that some of them have that they see Trump, letting Proud Boys out of prison who attacked police, pulling off people's security details, and members saying, I don't want to put my family at risk. It's better for me to keep my head down. And I'm, as a fellow member of Congress, and subject to the same level of security protection, I'm very sympathetic to that. At the same time, there is a sense of, if leadership is hard, maybe you're in the wrong line of work.
That sense of fear, you see articles written about this. Like it's at the individual level. They're afraid of Trump at a macro level, but then their own family security as well. And that's no way to run a government. But to your point, maybe they shouldn't be in office then.
Yeah, no, there's fear, and there's also, I think, a part that becomes somewhat self-justifying. I have a good friend who is no longer in Congress, but a Republican, and I was joking with him at one point about could we do something together on climate change? And he laughed and he said that'd be like me doing something on gay marriage. I'll immediately be out of a job, and you won't like the person who will replace me. And I sort of laughed. I teased him at the time. I said, how about we just make out? We can put this behind us so we can work on climate change. Like, I'm not worried, but like climate change matters to me.
Sure.
I'll give you a kiss if that helps. I think his answer, and this is someone who I respect, is a good person, was I don't like that I have to take these votes in this situation, but I'm holding this seat until the fever breaks, because if I don't, it's going to be taken by someone who is worse and doesn't share my values. And again, like I can empathize with that in some sense, but as a guy who flipped a seat that had been Republican for 50 years and has never been particularly anxious about, doing the right thing. There's 2 ways you can lose a Republican seat. One of them goes to the right, one of them goes to the left.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
And my view is that this is a job where if you can't go home at night and tell your kids, look them in the eye and say, I'm proud of what I did today, why have it?
That's a really, really powerful message. Maybe one more question before we let you go, and maybe shifting to the Democratic Party a little bit, and talk about what you see as the messaging or the focus the party needs to embrace moving forward. Are there certain ideas that you think are better for the party as it thinks about the midterm and the next presidential election?
So everybody's asking the question, but I think we have to elevate this conversation above partisanship as much as we can. We are in a moment where I think anybody in public office needs to be, for lack of a better word, Churchillian. Mm-hmm. We need to be making it very clear to the American people, this is the stakes of what's going on right now. This is the consequences of what happens if we don't fix it quickly. I make no promise that if we fight, we will succeed. I need to be very clear-eyed about what the consequences and the potential costs of that fight are. But I can guarantee you that if we don't fight, we will lose this 250-year-old experiment. And I think to the extent that any of us in public service, and I think our governor, J.B. Pritzker, is doing a very good job of that. We've tried in our way to do that where we can. But I think getting that out there and reminding people that we're all in this together and that we all have a vested interest in the outcome is how we get through this. As I've said to some of my Democratic colleagues who are more inclined to listen, when the world needs Churchill, don't serve up a bite of mansion.
That's a powerful message. So we are so grateful that you took some time to be with us today. We've been talking with Sean Casten, who represents the 6th District of Illinois. Thank you, Representative Casten. We really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure. Always enjoy talking with you.
Yes. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Georgetown law professor David Super.
You know that you can listen to Chicago's Progressive Talk on WCPT AM 820. Stream us live at WCPT820.com and on the TuneIn Radio app. Or you can ask Alexa, Siri, or Google to play WCPT from TuneIn. But now you have another option. We're simulcasting our programming overnight. 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. on WSBC AM 1240 for a clearer reception in and around the city. Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. And now overnights on WSBC 1240 AM, where facts matter.
It's nice to know someone is on your side. Mark Drugs always has your back. No two dogs are the same. A dosage form or strength of medication that works for one dog may not work for another. A compounding pharmacy like Mark Drugs is here to help you with your pet's medication challenges. We'll be happy to help you when your pet is sick. After all, it can affect the whole family. That's why we give our four-legged patients customized medications to make it easier for them to take. For pet medication problems, first see your veterinarian. Then talk to your hometown independent compounding pharmacy, Mark Drugs. If you'd like to know more about the ways we can personalize medication for each individual patient, we'd be happy to help. We are a compounding pharmacy, which means we can prepare the medication prescribed in a strength and dosage form that meets the patient's needs. Ask us how our pharmacy can help. You have a choice when it comes to your health care, and a great choice is Mark Drugs and Roselle and Deerfield, where you get better health and care for you and your pets. Check out the Pet of the Month at markdrugs.com.
Spring is finally here, and so are spring projects. So get them started at Harbor Freight's parking lot sale. Happening now. Save on products like pressure washers for $69.99, 42-inch roller cabinets for under $500, plus 30% off Hercules corded power tools. Whatever you do, do it for less at Harbor Freight. Valid until 3/9/25 while supplies last. Limitations apply, so spring in before it's over.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster William Muck.
Welcome back to WCPT. We are now joined by Professor David Super, who is a constitutional law scholar at Georgetown Law School. His official title is the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Law and Economics. In addition to Georgetown, he's also taught at Columbia, Harvard, Howard, Maryland, Penn, Washington Lee, and Yale. He is here today to help us make sense of the legal questions that have arisen from the flurry of activities we've seen this first 6 weeks of the Trump administration. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get too far, it's probably important to note that Georgetown Law School found itself in the news this week, and specifically a target of the Trump administration after Trump's top federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. sent a letter that his office would not hire any of the students' graduates if it didn't eliminate the diversity, equity, inclusion elements of its program. I'm curious to give you a little bit of space and react to how Georgetown, how you are feeling about all of this.
Well, it's absolutely outrageous that they're trying to leverage government power to tell a private university how to teach and what to teach. Georgetown's a Jesuit institution. We follow the principles of the Jesuits, which require looking at everyone as a full human being and taking them as such. It's disappointing that they're so unwilling to accept that.
I went to Marquette University for a master's, and you're right. The Jesuits, they get kind of lathered up when somebody from the outside kind of tells them how to do its work. So I really appreciated it. I thought your dean had a really compelling letter in response and sort of pushing back a bit. So let's think about this little big picture. So for the average American trying to make sense of what we're watching, especially on the legal front, it can be overwhelming. You know, one of the things I've most appreciated about your writing is your ability to simplify what we're watching play out. So we're going to dive into the weeds in a little bit, but can you offer a big picture assessment of what you believe Trump is attempting to do to the constitutional order and the overall legality of some of these efforts?
Well, various presidents in the past have made particular attempts to change particular constitutional rules. But President Trump, more than any of his predecessors, is trying to change everything all at once and change us from a checks and balances system to a strong presidential system where the courts and Congress are bit players.
Okay, sort of making that huge transition. Would you say, there's lots of conversation about whether we're in a constitutional crisis and, how grave or dangerous this moment is. There's no universally accepted definition for when we've entered a constitutional crisis. But in your assessment, do you believe we are entering a moment of constitutional danger?
Oh, we absolutely are. Our system was built on checks and balances. Those were the political theorists that the framers related to and tried to emulate. That's been the essence of constitutional law from the very beginning of our Constitution. And President Trump rejects that. He believes we need a strong president who can do whatever he wants and is largely unchecked by Congress and the courts. Trying to change a country's constitution is a constitutional crisis.
And do you, as you think about through history, are there other moments in history that you might compare this to say, hey, this is as significant as this? I mean, a lot of people obviously talk about the Civil War and then the challenges there. Are there other moments that compare to this, or is this unique?
This really is unique. Obviously, the Civil War was an effort to end the country by splitting it at least in two, and that's dramatic and important in its own way, but there's really no other precedent to this. You might have seen one of the Great Depression, but Franklin Roosevelt chose not to do it. Had he gone ahead with his plan to pack the Supreme Court, we might have started to get to the place that Mr. Trump is trying to take us now, but Roosevelt backed off. His allies in Congress said that was a bridge too far, that checks and balances were important, and as frustrated as he was, President Roosevelt stood down. There's no sign that President Trump's planning to stand down.
That's really significant. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the phrases and the legal terms we're hearing thrown around. And a phrase that we're hearing a lot today, especially in the legal cases against Donald Trump and his administration's actions, is arbitrary and capricious. And I had to look this up, and it comes from the Administrative Procedures Act of 1946, something I have not read, but I'm guessing you have. The basic idea being that the government cannot do things in a way that is arbitrary and capricious. Can you explain what that means and how we should think about this concept as it applies to the Trump administration and some of what they're doing?
Yes, arbitrary and capricious means ignoring the facts or ignoring reasonable arguments that are made. You don't have to agree with me, but you have to listen to me. And the courts have generally been very reluctant to find things arbitrary and capricious when it's a difference of opinion. But what we're seeing here is not a difference of opinion. For example, they sent out letters terminating lots of ongoing research projects for the National Institutes of Health, and the letters said, well, some projects like yours are problems, or many projects like yours are problems, but they made no effort to examine whether the particular project they were terminating was a problem. That's arbitrary and capricious. They could have looked it up before they just decided based on generalities that they didn't want to fund these people and wanted to stop their work in its tracks.
Have they put out a legal response to this? I mean, do they just argue we're not going to worry about something being arbitrary and capricious? Because it feels like with a lot of things, Donald Trump, they sort of lean into the illegality or the ways in which they're challenging the Constitution.
Well, that is a striking thing about it, is that many of the things they're doing, they could do 80, 85, 90% of the same thing legally, and they're making no effort to try. They're deliberately defying one law after another and daring the courts to stop them, which so far has been a mixed record. But their general view has not been so much to put forward their constitutional law theories as to try to be evasive. So the courts enjoin an action and they read into the court's order, oh, you're only enjoining us from doing it on the basis of that memo. Well, we'll pull out a new memo. And the court order doesn't say don't do it on the basis of that memo. Some of them say on the basis of that memo or anything similar, and yet they just go ahead and do the same thing with some new justification that is all but indistinguishable from the old one.
This sort of connects to this next term I wanted you to talk a little bit about, which is the idea of impoundment. And it's another term that the public is suddenly hearing a lot about. Can you explain how that relates? This is the presidential practice of impoundment and what we need to know in terms of understanding Trump's actions.
Yes, impoundment is taking money that Congress has appropriated and told the president to spend and refusing to spend it. President Nixon, towards the end of his term in office, made a lot of impoundments, found lots and lots of domestic spending that he didn't like, much of which he himself proposed, but he changed his mind on it and decided he didn't want to spend it. And that was challenged by the people who were entitled to the money under the Appropriations Act. And he lost every single case that was decided on the merits. It went up to the Supreme Court. He lost 9-0 there. Justice Rehnquist, very, very conservative justice, joined the rest of the justices in finding that what he did was unlawful. So this has been forgotten about largely in all the years since President Nixon, more than half a century, and now President Trump is bringing this back and is announcing he's going to refuse to spend money that Congress has appropriated for a wide range of purposes, and has continued to refuse to spend money even after he's lost in court.
We need to, this is really, really interesting. We need to take a quick break here, and we're going to come back with David Super and talk more about, when we come back, we're going to talk about what he argues is a presidential superpower that seems to be developing. We'll be right back on WCPT.
My brother-in-law died suddenly, and now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we could not put off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance.
For your free quote, call SelectQuote at 1-800-445-6363. That's 1-800-445-6363. Or go to SelectQuote.com. 1-800-445-6363. That's 1-800-445-6363.
SelectQuote. We shop. You save. Full details on example policies at selectquote.com/commercials.
If you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance your existing home, you need to call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. Zeke, self-employed, called to refinance his $1 million home after being rejected by 3 lenders. Zeke contacted me after hearing me explain how I helped another self-employed listener who was also rejected due to lack of income. I helped Zeke secure an $800,000 cash-out refinance using the 12-month average of Zeke's business bank statements. Let's review. Zeke called to refinance his home after being rejected by 3 lenders, and we helped Zeke refinance using the deposits into his business bank statements. If you're self-employed and want to work with mortgage professionals who understand self-employed borrowers, call Team Hochberg at 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Team Hochberg's helped thousands of self-employed listeners, but we can't help if you don't call 855-563-2843 and that website you love, 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
I'm Jessica Ettinger, CNBC. It was a whipsaw day for stocks, with the major averages finishing in the green this afternoon. The Dow popping 222 points, 0.5%, led higher by shares of IBM, up 5%. The S&P 500 index up 31 points. That was 0.5%. The NASDAQ up 126 points. That was 0.7%. NVIDIA shares ended the day higher, up almost 2%. Target shares hit a 52-week low today, but companies whose shares hit new all-time highs include McDonald's, KFC and Taco Bell parent Yum Brands, Kroger, and AutoZone. Today, President Trump talked about new Tariffs coming earlier than expected. The markets tanked this morning. But this afternoon, the Fed Chair Jay Powell said some positive things about the economy, and stocks made a recovery. Jessica Ettinger, CNBC.
Hear the CNBC business updates each weekday at 9:30, 12:30, and 4:30. Now, your WCPT 820 Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center and meteorologist Shave Marslick. Into tonight, the chance of rain and snow showers will continue before midnight under cloudy skies with a low around 28 degrees. North winds around 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday, we'll see lots of sunshine with a high near 46 degrees. West winds pick up at 5 to 15 and gust as high as 25 miles per hour into the afternoon. Saturday night looks mostly clear at the low around 31 degrees. West winds at 5 to 15 and gusting as high as 25 miles per hour through the overnight. That's your latest Chicago weather update. Right now, it's 36 degrees.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. We are talking with David Super, who's a law professor at Georgetown Law. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about, you've talked about a presidential superpower. And earlier you mentioned that some of the actions taken by Trump, which you highlight as illegal, could have been done within the law, given the Republican majority in Congress. Trump could have worked within the requirements of the Impoundment and Control Act or a lot of other litigation or legislation. Yet the administration chose not to follow that process. And they intentionally seem to be violating some of the laws and Supreme Court rulings that regulate the conduct of the president. You write about that choice and suggest it's evidence of a broader desire to establish a presidential superpower. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yes, the Constitution says that the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That's always been interpreted as meaning that Congress writes the laws subject to a presidential veto, and the president then carries them out. Lots of discretion in how they're carried out, but the basic laws are set by Congress. What President Trump seems to be saying is that Congress cannot regulate anything about the president, and therefore when the Congress says that you must give the public notice and the opportunity to comment before you change important regulations about public employment, if the president doesn't like that, this administration says he shouldn't have to follow it. When Congress says you should spend money on this and that, if the president doesn't like it, his view is that he shouldn't have to do that. This suggests that Congress perhaps could offer some general suggestions, that Congress could regulate conduct between private parties, but anything to do with what the administration does would be subject to the final control of the president.
Now, would this be what we often hear of as the unitary executive theory? Is that sort of the broader idea that's playing out?
No, this is not that. The unitary executive theory says that the president can overrule cabinet members or other officials in the executive branch, and there are some disputes about the margins of that, but that's a position that has a long history in this country. This is more converting us to the French system, where you have a president who is largely unchecked in large areas of policy, and the legislature is expected to be subordinate.
That's interesting, although it gives me something else to worry about, because I was just worried about the unitary executive theory. Now I got to think about both. So, when you're writing about this, that you note that the administration's current focus is exercising this asserted superpower on fiscal, regulatory, and personal matters. But one could imagine it trying to extend the superpower's reach into the civil rights and civil liberties realm. And I have to admit, when I read that, it hit me with a thud. Can you explain to us what you mean by that, extending this to thinking about civil rights and civil liberties?
Yes. The president has already said that he's going to take severe action against anyone engaging in what he calls diversity, equity, and inclusion activities, which he hasn't defined, and there's no generally accepted definition of them. some activities, such as making classrooms accessible with wheelchair ramps or putting Braille cards on elevators so that people with visual impairments can go up and down, are not just good ideas, but they're required by federal law. This appears to mean that he would be able to say that those activities are no longer allowed.
The ramifications of that are really quite significant, right? I mean, that's a dramatic expansion of power.
It is, and we've generally been skeptical in this country that anyone has a monopoly on wisdom. Our Supreme Court has 9 justices because we don't trust any one of them or even any 3 of them. And our president is the first among equals, subject to control by Congress and the judiciary, because we don't like single authoritarian figures. We fought a revolution against George III, and we rejected the idea of setting up an American monarchy to replace him.
Mm-hmm. A second principle you've highlighted in terms of your concerns about the Trump administration is their attempt to eliminate what you describe as neutral arbiters of fact. Who are these neutral arbiters, and why is the Trump administration attempting to eliminate them?
Well, there are a lot of them around. Obviously, judges are expected to be neutral in ruling on cases that come before them. Journalists, for the most part, are accepted to be neutral. We've got some that are partisan Democrat or partisan Republican or whatever, but the tradition of journalism has been being honest about the facts. Universities are expected to adhere to the research, and you see academics writing articles where they say, I don't like these results, but this is what the research tells me. Scientists do that, and perhaps most importantly for these purposes, government civil servants who are protected against partisan interference and were thought to have secure jobs provide that kind of security so that you can trust what they say. The courts rely on them in all sorts of ways. When an FBI agent testifies in court, that's seen as a big deal. Well, now we're seeing FBI agents fired because they conducted lawful investigations of people who are now friendly with this administration or indeed leading this administration. That means that you can lie, and there's no one who's going to be widely trusted to call you out on that. People lie usually for bad reasons, and we should be concerned about that.
It's sort of a bedrock of good democratic governance is to have these neutral arbiters that elevate and hold people accountable. You know, as we talk about this, I can't help but wonder how you assess the decision of the administration to fire the senior military lawyers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as the decision of the administration to revoke the security clearances of all the lawyers at Covington and Burling, the firm that was representing the special counsel Jack Smith. I mean, it seems like a pattern of eliminating neutral arbiters and then targeting those who may slow down the process.
Indeed, it's quite alarming. Even more alarming than firing the senior military lawyers was the stated reason for doing so, that they might object to things that the administration wants to do. Well, that's exactly why we have judge advocate generals in the military, because the military has enormous power, and we want some independent assurance that that will be handled lawfully and in accordance with our Constitution. So I found that quite chilling. We've seen other countries have terrible abuses when the military went on a rampage, often at the behest of the sitting government. We've always thought we were secure from that here, but when you start purging the people who are responsible for making sure we don't get overrun by our military, it has to be worrying.
Yeah. I'd like to talk to you a little about you highlight in your writing a legal strategy that the Trump administration is deploying as it relates to all of these temporary restraining orders, or TROs, that courts are placing on the administration. So the courts have been active and a number of instances have told the Trump administration to stop or to slow down. But you write that while the administration assures the public it will fully comply with the court decisions, the on-the-ground reality suggests something very different.
Yes, they've been ordered to stop across-the-board freezes of appropriated funds from Congress, and they've simply not done it. And many of the funds go to small nonprofits, quite a few of which are now bankrupt. They've laid off all their employees, closed their doors. If it is ultimately found that what the administration did is indeed illegal, it'll be irreversible. That's precisely the reason why these injunctions were granted, but by refusing to follow them, the administration basically wins the case, whatever the courts may say.
Is there a response to that, right? I mean, if the court, if the administration says, well, we can't because of these, does that sort of end the legal process, or are there other remedies to pursue at that point?
The courts can act faster, recognizing that these are often very vulnerable, small religious or secular nonprofits that are being wiped out. The courts have been giving the administration a great deal of deference, assuming it will comply with court orders, which federal administrations typically have done, and have not treated them as untrustworthy, have given them lots and lots of time. I was reading an order today where a court found that the administration had violated one of its orders by continuing a funding cutoff, and it ordered the administration to file a statement next week telling the court what it was doing. If you or I violated a court order, we'd be writing our statement from jail. But the administration is being given extra time, and in the past, that would have made sense, but this administration has made clear it isn't interested in complying with court orders it doesn't agree with, and much of what it's doing is going to be irreparable by the time the courts catch up.
It strikes me as I think about USAID, that may be part of what we're seeing right now, where, I mean, the courts have sort of intervened to say you can't move, you got to slow this down. But if you dismantle the infrastructure, if you dismantle the institution, if the people are gone, even if the courts were to say, okay, start that funding again, the institution, the organization wouldn't be in place to even do that. It's a powerful strategy.
Well, indeed, that actually did happen. A court on February 13th did order them to resume funding. They didn't. On February 20th, it told them again to resume funding. They didn't. A few days later, it reiterated that. They didn't comply. Finally, the court ordered them to start the payments right away, and gave them a deadline of a couple days to do that. The administration went to the Supreme Court, said that this was unreasonable and intolerable, and the Supreme Court this past week ruled 5-4 that the lower court's order could stand, and that the administration did need to comply with this early order, and we'll now see whether, with even the Supreme Court weighing in, they will actually restart these programs. But we're told that many of the organizations that they funded in very poor parts of the world have already gone bankrupt. So they may get some funding out. It may be in time to save some of their grantees, but others will be gone. And as you say, they're going to have a hard time doing much of this because they've gotten rid of so much of their workforce.
That's absolutely right. So, well, I'll maybe wrap up with a big picture question on the Supreme Court. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on what role you believe the Supreme Court is going to play in all of this. It's undoubtedly that it's going to be the final arbiter of whether Trump's actions are legal or constitutional. In your writings, you express some worries over whether the justices will be up to the challenge. What are you thinking about as these cases inevitably make their way to the Supreme Court?
The administration is doing a great many things that are troubling, some of which are legal and some of which are not. The cases involving objectionable but legal things, the court's going to back the administration. There's no real question about that. But on the things like these funding cutoffs, like these arbitrary and capricious rescissions of grants, like rescinding grants when there's no legal authority to do so, the mass firings, those things that clearly contravene law, I think are going to be very troubling to this court. This court is populated by self-described textualists who believe in following the word of the law and not policy opinions. This will be a good test for them.
Much to come. Well, thank you so much. We've been joined by Professor David Super, who's a constitutional law scholar at Georgetown Law School. Thank you, David. This has been really, really insightful. I feel like our listeners have learned a lot about the law today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, we are going to get to a break, and then we'll be back in just a second.
WCPT replay.
We have to make sure that our elected officials, and I've said this so many times in the last 2 weeks, we have to make absolutely certain that they are having darn near a daily press conference, if not on Fridays before the weekend and on Mondays when people come back. Here's what the Republicans are doing that's garbage. Here's what we're doing to change that or affect that. This is our position on this item, whether it be House members or Senate members or both. And it needs to be out in public every single, at minimum, week. But we also have to highlight when they have any of these sort of infighting items going on. Our leaders have to be willing to say, "This is, y'all gonna get more of this. This is what you're gonna see. It's gonna happen more and more. They're not gonna be able to fix it because they're not the party that's really the party they said they were."
Keep listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, anxiety meds, everyone's on them. If you're a 50-year-old male, maybe a bit porky, and you may even have type 2 diabetes, $1 million of term insurance may only cost you about $200 a month. Call Term Provider. Speak with Big Lou at 800-511-3535. Big Lou will find a term life policy for you even if you have type 2 diabetes, are overweight, or have high blood pressure. Term Provider has helped thousands of people like you who think they can't afford term life insurance. To buy $1 million of affordable term life for you, all you need to do is call Big Lou at 800-511-3535. Lou will make sure the scales are tipped in your favor. Call 800-511-3535. Big Lou will answer your call and work to fit you into a term life policy that you can afford. Remember, Big Lou's like you. He's on meds too. Call 800-511-3535. 800-511-3535 or biglou.com.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive. Filling in today for Joan, political science professor at North Central College, author and podcaster, William Muck.
Welcome back to the Joan Esposito Show. There's a lot to reflect on, and we'll do that in just a second. But before we do so, I want to remind you that if you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance your existing home, you need to do what Joan did, and she called Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender with over 500 five-star Google reviews. Kathy, 60, a nurse who lives in a $600,000 home, called Team Hochberg for a free consultation to consolidate the over $30,000 she'd accumulated on her credit cards after her husband passed away. After speaking with David, Kathy posted this 5-star Google review. Quote, "David was very helpful. He didn't try to sell me anything. He advised me to keep my current mortgage because of my low rate. He offered me excellent advice and was very patient, kind, and knowledgeable. I highly recommend his services to anyone looking for a mortgage or any financial expertise," end quote. If you'd like this kind of type of 5-star service on your next mortgage, do what Joan did and call Team Hochberg at 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. David's helped Joan and thousands of WCPT listeners, but he can't help if you don't call 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061. Well, that was really, really interesting. Those 3 interviews talking to Phil Barker about international politics, getting Sean Casten's view on the world that is Trump, and then talking with David Super about the legality of all this. And most interesting, asking Representative Sean Casten about whether we're in a constitutional crisis, and he jumped into that and said, yes, we absolutely are. David Super, who's a Georgetown law professor, also believes that we are in a constitutional crisis, and I think it reflects the grave moment that we are in right now, and it's humbling, right, to have some of that play out. But before we get out of here, there's one thing, and this is maybe a little bit humorous before we go, and I want to talk a little about Marco Rubio. I mentioned earlier when I was asking Sean Casten about people who know better, what's going on in their mind, how do they convince themselves. Marco Rubio, I think, is the perfect example of somebody who understands what Donald Trump is doing, understands all too well the threat that Donald Trump poses, because he has expressed that concern before, but now finds himself fully embracing the Trump position, particularly that position on Ukraine. So we're going to play a couple clips here. The first one we're going to play is Marco Rubio before he became Secretary of State, when he was a staunch defender of Ukraine. And I want you to listen to the argument he puts forward for why the United States needs to defend Ukraine, why this is a moral issue, it's a strategic issue. You won't remember this, Marco Rubio, but let's listen to that.
When the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, Ukraine was left with the world's third largest stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons on the planet. But they signed this agreement with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that basically said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we, these three countries that signed to this, will provide for your defense and assure you of your defense. And so Ukraine did that. They gave up these weapons. Well, now, this was signed in 1994, 20 years later, one of the three countries that signed that agreement hasn't just not provided for their defense, they actually invaded them. And I want to make a point on this for a second. Think about if you're one of these other countries around the world right now that feels threatened by your neighbors. And the United States and the rest of the world are going to you and saying, listen, don't develop nuclear weapons. Don't develop nuclear weapons, South Korea. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Japan. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia. We will protect you. We will watch out for you. What kind of lesson do you think this instance sends to them? I think the message this is sending to many nations around the world is perhaps we can no longer count on the security promises made by the free world. Perhaps we need to start looking out for ourselves. And that's why the Ukrainian situation is so much more important than simply what's happening in Europe. This has implications around the world.
All right, that's really interesting. I don't know if there's a more full-throated defense of Ukraine than what Marco Rubio just offered right there. Again, our talk going all the way back, Marco understands the history, the agreement that was signed in 1994 between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine, where Ukraine willingly gave up its nuclear weapons for security guarantees that Russia would not invade Ukraine. He makes this strategic argument that the United States' word is something, and it matters. If we're going to have these agreements, we need to defend them. And more broadly, the idea of defending democracy, right? So I like that Marco Rubio. It's compelling. All right, it's going to get even better. We're going to play another video that goes back to 2015 when Marco Rubio was running for president. And you're going to hear him criticize Donald Trump. And it's, again, much like his defense of Ukraine, it's one of the best critiques you're going to hear of Donald Trump. Let's play that, Lady B.
Let me tell you something. I will never quit. I will never stop until we keep a con man from taking over the party of Reagan and the conservative movement. He's a con man. He's a con man. He's a con man. I'll tell you why. Number one, people are angry and frustrated and scared about the future. Okay? People are working harder than they've ever worked in their lives, and they're running in place. And he swoops in and is taking advantage of that. He's taking advantage of that. He's telling people, I'm going to fight for the little guy. I'm fighting for the working class. Here's what he doesn't tell them. He has spent a career in business, 50 years, sticking it to the little guy. Sticking it to the little guy. When his companies went bankrupt, the first people that didn't get paid were the subcontractors, the plumbers and the pipe fitters and the people that laid bricks and all those people that worked for a living. They didn't get paid. He got his money. They didn't get theirs. He's going around telling people, oh, I'm fighting to keep other countries from taking our jobs. What is he talking about? You ever bought a Trump tie? If you buy a Trump tie, you're not just getting a tacky tie. You're buying a tie made in China or in Mexico. He portrays himself as the strongest guy on illegal immigration. That's fine, but Trump Tower was built by illegal immigrants from Poland, who he paid $4 an hour, 12 hours a day. Okay, a judge found that he was involved in a conspiracy to defraud these workers of their pay. Even now in Florida, he has a hotel or something down there. And 300 Americans have applied for jobs at that hotel. All of them got turned down. Instead, he brings workers from other countries. He acts like he's some sort of tough guy. He's not a tough guy. This is the first guy that asked for Secret Service protection. First guy.
The other day he told a protester, I wish I could punch you in the face. Donald Trump has never punched anyone in the face, okay?
Oh, this is why history and records matter, right? Because we can go back and, again, that's one of the better critiques of Donald Trump offered by his current Secretary of State. Marco Rubio says he's never going to stop. He's never going to allow Donald Trump to take over the party of the Republican Party. Well, when you were sitting on that couch watching Donald Trump belittle and berate President Zelensky, you could see him sinking in the shame because he has completely given up his integrity, his argument, his position. You know, Marco Rubio genuinely believed in Ronald Reagan and believed in defending democracy and all of that. And he has had to compromise all of those values and all of those beliefs. And he did so for power. And apparently now more recently, over the last couple of days, you've heard Marco Rubio say that he's frustrated that he doesn't have enough influence or voice in the State Department, which isn't surprising at all. If Marco Rubio had gone back and listened to the critique that Marco Rubio offered of Donald Trump, he would have known that he would not let anybody around him and that he would have surrounded himself with loyalists. And so the accusation is that there are 3 or 4 loyalists at the State Department who really call the shots. And Marco is pretty much a figurehead. So, I mean, it reveals the damage that can be done by embracing a president like Donald Trump, a populist demagogue who is just going to destroy and ruin everybody around them. And currently it's Marco Rubio. I heard somebody was, online, there was some commentary talking about making an accusation that both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, both the individuals on the couch there during that belittling of Zelensky, both are going to hell. The only difference being that Marco Rubio knows it. And when you see his face and you see that expression, you realize the danger that anti-democratic forces like Donald Trump represent. And the hope is that the democracy can sort of wake up to some of these calls and push back and maybe go back and listen to old Marco Rubio, because that guy wasn't all wrong. So, well, we need to wrap up. It's been a fantastic show. I really appreciate all the callers and all the guests. I feel like I get a lot of strength from listening to you as a community. So I will be back on Monday. I'm very, very excited. We've got some really fun guests on there. In particular, we're going to talk a little bit about democracy and where we go and where the Democratic Party goes. So on that note, I will wish you all a good weekend, and I will see you all back here on Monday.
Do you keep putting off that much-needed dental work? You know, that back molar that zings whenever you drink something cold, or that old loose crown that migrates up and down like a yo-yo every time you eat? This is Dr.